Chapter 1379. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. I can use primordial chi. Qin Hao shook his head. Well, people have ugly souls and rotten lives. They are like beasts that haven't fully evolved. Although I'm not from Daqin, I've heard of this. You don't understand human nature. Why don't you live a lowly life on Turtle Island instead of crossing the sea to come here? Are you tired of living? Qin Hao's sarcastic words enraged the Japanese martial artists who were holding the chains. They had always thought that they were of noble birth, but Qin Hao had described them as beasts that had yet to fully evolve. They roared out loud, and it was unknown what they were communicating with each other. As the chains tightened, the four of them seemed to want to tear Qin Hao's body apart. Tokugawa Shinichi waved his hand to stop his subordinates. He sneered, "Well, people, that a dirty name given to us by the people of East Continent. You still don't admit that you're from Qin? Forget it, it's not important. Hand over the inheritance of the great emperor, and I'll grant you a quick death." Voluntarily handing over the inheritance could preserve its integrity. If Qin Hao resisted violently and destroyed the power of the inheritance, part of it would be damaged. Of course, Tokugawa Shinichi wanted to obtain the perfect power. Dream on. Qin Hao refused decisively. The news that he released about the inheritance of the great emperor could be false or true. After all, he was Denda reborn. Qin Hao's inheritance included the understanding of alchemy. In the alchemy world, it was not an exaggeration to call him the supreme existence. Asking him to hand over his inheritance to the people and let the supreme alchemy be passed down from generation to generation was the biggest joke. Kill him. Tokugawa Shinichi narrowed his eyes. He could feel from Qin Hao that this person was arrogant and not someone who would yield easily. Time was limited. If the inheritance fell into the hands of others and was damaged, then so be it. It would be troublesome if the warriors of Yunmeng Mountain came. The four were martial artists holding the chains smiled hideously. They had long disliked Qin Hao. Since their master gave the order, a powerful force appeared in their palms. The chains embedded in Qin Hao's flesh were pulled taut. "Wait," Zhou Wudao said hurriedly. "We don't have the inheritance of the great emperor. Believe it or not, you won't get anything if you kill my brother. I have a high-grade imperial weapon here that hasn't been fully activated. If you let him go, I'll give it to you and tell you how to unlock it." Zhou Wudao didn't Tokugawa Shinichi's the sword. Zhou Wudao threw the sword, fell Zhou Wudao, and it fell. Under the moonlight, Zhou Wudao's assess. Zhou Wudao, translation. Zhou Wudao, translation. For Wudao, for Zhou Wudao, translation. "It's a good sword." Tokugawa Shinichi nodded approvingly. With a smile on his face, he stepped on the sword that was stuck in the ground into the mud. He deliberately stomped on it a few times, as if he was stepping on Zhou Wudao's head and trampling on his dignity. Creak! Zhou Wudao clenched his fists so hard that blue veins popped out. The sword was not only a partner, but also a martial artist's life. He what translation, it's for translation, for Wudao, translation, for Wudao. For the sword is good. I'll take it. As for his life, I'll take it too. We'll know if there's an inheritance after we try. Tokugawa Shinichi waved his hand casually. It was just killing a person. People from East Continent, regardless of their gender, were born to be conquered and toyed with by the Yamato clan. Go to hell. Zhou Wudao roared. His left ankle blossomed with light, and the power of the third palace was activated. At this moment, an astonishing power surged in his body. His speed increased, and he shot out like a rocket. His palm reached forward and grabbed Tokugawa Shinichi's neck. He couldn't stop the Japanese from killing Qin Hao. The only thing he could do was to take down Tokugawa Shinichi with all his strength. He would trade his life for Qin Hao's. Tokugawa Shinichi's eyes were full of mockery. His four subordinates didn't look worried at all. Seeing Zhou Wudao resist, they even laughed as if mocking him for not knowing his place. They were very confident in Tokugawa Shinichi's strength. With the excitement of killing, Tokugawa Shinichi licked the corner of his mouth and rushed forward like the wind. He put his hand on his waist. When he got close to Zhou Wudao, he suddenly drew his sword and slashed forward. Zhou Wudao, don't be rash. Qin Hao knew that he was injured. Activating the power of the third palace would worsen his internal injuries. However, his legs and shoulders were pierced by the sharp claws into his flesh and bones. He couldn't use his strength and couldn't move his body. As the four Japanese martial artists pulled with all their strength, a strong tearing pain swept through his body. His meridians and bones were dislocated, as if they were being pulled out of his flesh. Although Qin Hao was anxious, he couldn't come to his rescue. Besides, he was in more danger now. Piercing the flesh with the sharp claws was a trick that Japanese martial artists often used to kill their enemies. When Qin Hao was the emperor, he conquered the Japanese, and many of his generals died in this way. This weapon was made with great care. When it was stuck in the bones, one couldn't use any strength. The only way was to use vital qi to break it. However, Diluo Bei's geology was special and couldn't use vital qi. No matter how strong Qin Hao's body was, he couldn't withstand it. The tearing feeling swept through like a flood, and the sound of bones breaking rang out in his body. He felt that his arms and legs were being separated from his body. Qin Hao was enduring unimaginable pain, and cold sweat poured down his forehead. He thought back to his previous life. How many of Great Qin's residents have been slaughtered by the Wa people, including the children and elderly. The lowly Wa people were like inhumane wolves. After sweeping through everything, they left nothing but blood and corpses behind. The Japanese deserved to die. Qin Hao raised his head and roared like an injured dragon. The art of endless samsara was running wildly. The surging power flowed through his meridians and hit the divine demon blood essence in his heart again and again. This drop of divine demon blood essence was left by a divine level master. The power of a divine level master couldn't be restrained by the way of heaven. Now that there was no way to escape, he could only pin his hopes on the divine blood essence. Awakening it might change the situation. Roar. Qin Hao's roar spread out like a dragon's roar, giving people an inviolable sense of dominance. He ran the divine level cultivation technique and tried to awaken the blood essence in his body again and again. Under the shock of the divine level cultivation technique, the sleeping blood essence gradually glowed with a scarlet halo. This halo seemed weak, but it seeped into Qin Hao's body and overflowed on the surface of his body, making him look like he was covered in a bloody halo. What's going on? What tenacious perseverance! The four Japanese warriors who were desperately trying to tear the chains heard Qin Hao's roar, and their hearts trembled. An inexplicable sense of fear rose from the bottom of their hearts. Qin Hao had clearly been struck by the claw, but not only was his strength not weakened, he was struggling even harder, especially when a hazy, blood-red halo flashed around his body. The four Japanese martial artists suddenly felt a sense of danger, as if they could smell the scent of death. Finish him. One of them couldn't stand the spreading fear. He abandoned the chains and drew his saber, slashing towards Qin Hao's head. Not only was his attack decisive, but his saber was also fast. It was as if this saber was born to kill. The four Japanese warriors cooperated very well. When one of them moved, the other three held on tightly to the chains. They had to trap Qin Hao to death. Shua! The saber light slashed down. Qin Hao's resistance intensified and death approached. Everything happened in a flash. It was as if the enemy had already attacked when Zhou Wudao attacked. If he dies, I will massacre the entire Japanese tribe. Zhou Wudao's eyes were red. His relationship with Qin Hao wasn't just because of the heavenly pact. In his heart, he also couldn't tolerate anyone killing Qin Hao. Firstly, he was his opponent. Secondly, he owed his life to Qin Hao. It was Qin Hao who saved him from Jiaoying. Zhou Wudao's roar was of no use. Instead, it distracted him and caused his moves to slow down. As he exchanged blows with Tokugawa Shinichi, the saber pierced his abdomen. His palm didn't even touch the other party. Weakling, Tokugawa Shinichi sneered. He lifted his leg and kicked Zhou Wudao in the chest. As he pulled out his saber, blood rained down. Zhou Wudao fell heavily to the ground. I thought you had some skills. You can't even take a single blow from me. You're not worthy to be my opponent. The two of you are the weakest I've ever seen in my life. Something's not right. Tokugawa Shinichi's eyelids suddenly twitched. He looked in the direction of Qin Hao. There was a shocking force coming from there. With one look, Tokugawa Shinichi was completely dumbfounded. He swore that he had seen the most terrifying scene in his life. He saw the sharp saber light coming down on Qin Hao's head. His body was restrained, and he couldn't use his Yuan Qi in the fallen Emperor Bei. He was supposed to die. However, when the saber landed, a powerful red light suddenly shot into the sky. It was dazzling. In the light, the saber light was shattered. The Japanese martial artist who attacked was torn apart by the light. He turned into specks of light and dissipated. Along the way, he screamed like a ghost. Yuan Qi, how is this possible? Tokugawa Shinichi's legs were trembling. Not only were his legs trembling, but his voice and heart were also trembling. He looked at the aura rising from Qin Hao's body. It couldn't be wrong. It was Yuan Qi. However, this Yuan Qi wasn't like the Yuan Qi he had seen from other martial artists. It gave off a completely different feeling. It was as though the Yuan Qi had mutated. No matter what it was, he just had to run. Tokugawa Shinichi didn't hesitate at all. He didn't even have time to check if Zhou Wudao was dead. He exploded with the speed he was most proud of in his life. He ran like a stray dog, leaving behind a string of suave silhouettes for his subordinates. When using Yuan Qi, he was invincible in the fallen Emperor Bei. After all, no one could use it at the moment. However, if an alien used it, it would definitely be a disaster. They couldn't afford to provoke it. Not to mention the five of them. Even if Tokugawa Shinichi had a 50,000-man army in his hands, they could be destroyed by Qin Hao in the blink of an eye. The most fundamental difference between martial artists and ordinary people was Yuan Qi. Since Qin Hao could use it, in his eyes, all the conquerors in the fallen Emperor Bei were like farmers with no combat ability. The terrifying red aura rose into the sky. The Japanese martial artist who attacked Qin Hao was instantly turned into ashes by the Yuan Qi. The remaining three people looked as though they had seen a terrifying demon king. Their eyes were filled with fear. In fact, their speed of escape wasn't slow. Swoosh! The great void sword was stabbed into his feet. Qin Hao held the sword in a dignified posture like an emperor. Suddenly, 3 scarlet sword chi burst out from the sword. They flew out like streams of light with eyes. They let out ear-piercing screams and pierced through the bodies of the 3 Japanese martial artists. Running fast, faster than Yuan Qi killing? At this moment, Zhou Wudao, who had been stabbed, opened his eyes wide. The shock and surprise on his face were no less than that of the fleeing Tokugawa Shinichi. It was simply clatter. The chains embedded in his body were disintegrated and dissipated by the surging Yuan Qi. Qin Hao stepped toward Zhou Wudao. When his first step landed, a layer of silver armor spread over his body. When his second step landed, the armor covered half of his body. When he approached Zhou Wudao, apart from the helmet, Qin Hao was already covered in the Sagittarius Palace battle suit. The 12 wings on his back flapped, making him look like a god descending from the 9th heaven. "Are you all right?" he asked. "No, I'm all right," Zhou Wudao replied foolishly. Qin Hao smiled and stuffed a pill into Zhou Wudao's mouth. He stretched out his hand and said, "Let's go. Let's destroy that kid from the Tokugawa family." Zhou Wudao nodded honestly. He stretched out his hand and held it tightly. Education 123 Literature Network. Chapter 1380. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, the strongest relic the terrain of the back mountain, was even more complicated. The fog was thick and the visibility was very low. Qin Hao flew in the air. His red lotus fiery pupils were shining. The terrain and fog could not hinder him from moving forward. His scarlet eyes were locked on Tokugawa Shinichi, who was fleeing in front of him. He was like a hunter chasing his prey. Qin Hao used a divine-level skill to awaken the divine blood. The strange primordial qi flowing in his body was different from before. Its source of power mainly came from the divine blood. This state couldn't be maintained for too long. This was also the reason why he summoned the battle suit. The battle suit could only be activated by primordial chi. Now that there was an enemy chasing him, he summoned the battle suit to protect himself. Tokugawa Shinichi was really scared. He was very fast, but he didn't run down the mountain. Instead, he went all the way north along the rugged ridge. It seemed that he wanted to go to a place where he could avoid Qin Hao's pursuit. The Donghua people are very careful. They will be well prepared before they fight with any opponent. This time, they fell into your hands. Not only did they not get what they wanted, but they also lost 5 elites. They should be Tokugawa Shinichi's subordinates. He will never forgive you. Zhou Wudao knew that the Donghua people were vengeful. If they didn't kill Tokugawa Shinichi, they would leave behind an irresistible source of trouble. Who knew when they would destroy their plan or kill the people around them? Qin Hao nodded. He will kill him. Did you notice that he seemed to be in a panic? But he seems to have a purpose. He deliberately wants to lead us to a certain place. However, no matter where he goes, God can't save him. Qin Hao's eyes were filled with determination. In his previous life, he swore that he would kill every Donghua person he saw. Even if this ambush didn't happen, Qin Hao would still kill Tokugawa Shinichi if he didn't come to provoke him. Even if he became a disciple of the Divine Palace, he would still kill him in the Divine Palace. Holding Zhou Wudao's shoulder, Qin Hao flew at a steady speed. He didn't fly up suddenly to create pressure and panic for Tokugawa Shinichi. Since Tokugawa Shinichi wanted to lead him, he wanted to see where Tokugawa Shinichi went and what was different about it. The Donghua people were used to torturing others and let them die in despair. Today, Qin Hao is going to let this descendant of the Tokugawa shogunate experience what despair was. A moment later, the mountain ridge disappeared. At the end of the back mountain of the Yunmeng Mountain was a cliff like a natural moat that cut off the way forward. On the edge of the cliff, dozens of gigantic iron chains extended forward. One end of the chains was connected to the broken cliff of the misty cloud mountain, while the other end extended into the boundless clouds. Qin Hao and Zhou Wudao didn't know what was on the other side of the fog, but Tokugawa Shinichi ran up a huge iron chain and quickly disappeared into the miasma. Qin Hao did not slow down and rushed into the miasma with Zhou Wudao. The inside of the miasma was extremely thick, like a thick wall. Even with the red lotus fiery pupil activated, Qin Hao immediately lost track of Tokugawa Shinichi. However, this did not hinder their pursuit, and they just had to continue flying. The miasma covered an extremely wide area. It was as if he was cut off from the rest of the world. There was only a white world before his eyes. Qin Hao flew for good, while before his vision suddenly became clear. Then he rushed out. However, the world behind the miasma was very different from that of the Yunmeng Mountain. When Qin Hao landed and let go of Zhou Wudao's shoulder, both of them were shocked by the scene before them. In front of them was a brand new world. In the void, the sun and the moon were shining as brightly as day. Statues of dozens of feet high stood there. Each statue had a different posture, like a mighty army blocking their way. Some of the statues held swords and sabers. Some looked up at the sky. Some sat cross-legged like warriors, and some had zither under their bodies. They pressed their hands on the strings carved from huge stones, as if they were living people playing the zither. The scene was solemn and sacred, as if all the strong people in the world had gathered here to hold a meeting of the strong. Every statue here represented one of the cultivation directions of the martial way. This, Zhou Wudao was extremely shocked. He had been in the mountain with Qin Hao for more than half a month. He had never thought that there would be such a magnificent scene behind the Yunmeng Mountain. Judging from the scene, it was obvious that the countless statues in front of them were relics. Moreover, it was probably the most powerful one in the relics of the Emperor Bei. Who would have thought that there would be such a magnificent scene after passing through the endless fog? Qin Hao had spent a lot of time flying just now. If it were an ordinary person, they would not have had the patience to finish walking. Tokugawa Shinichi has given us a big gift. Qin Hao could not help but smile. He naturally knew the value of this relic. He stepped forward. Be careful. Zhou Wudao hurried to keep up. Everything was unfamiliar. Tokugawa Shinichi had deliberately led them here. He must have a trick up his sleeve. Moreover, this person had suddenly disappeared. They had to be careful. As Qinhao walked through the massive statues, he carefully looked left and right. He felt a strange sensation from the statues, as if they were living creatures. After walking in, the eyes of the statues looked at you from different angles, as if they wanted to convey something. Qinhao looked at the eyes of the statues. His spirit merged with the feeling. At this moment, many inexplicable scenes appeared in his mind. 6 years ago, he was reborn in the Qin mansion of Akita Town. He cultivated the skills of his previous life. Golden finger, water wind step, and graceful sword. At the volcanic mountain, he withdrew the red lotus overlord fire and regained control of the power of fire. When he met Dan Xian, he entered the Fengli Temple and revisited the Tao of Alchemy. Luo Shui, he entered Qiang University and interacted with Yao Lao. His alchemy skills reached a new level. At the blood pool at Broken Dragon Cliff, his physical body was reconstructed. In the underground Imperial Mausoleum, he met Mu Yue again and obtained the Crimson Arrow. Fragments flashed through his mind. Each fragment was a crucial step after his rebirth. What were they trying to convey? At this moment, Qinhao understood. Zhou Wu Dao, today is an opportunity for you and me to be reborn. Whether or not we can comprehend the power of the emperors will depend on our luck. Qinhao pointed to the statues. Did you feel it? When we first stepped in, there was no obvious aura on them. Every time we walked a distance, there was a faint pressure. The deeper we went, the stronger the pressure from the statues. If I'm not wrong, they symbolize martial arts. They symbolize the process of a weak cultivator becoming strong. Each statue here represents the pinnacle of martial arts. You mean? Zhou Wudao looked at Qinhao. He had the same feeling. In his mind, fragments of his childhood training appeared. How he grew stronger step by step, and even the scene of him being defeated by Qinhao in the Imperial Martial Arts Tournament. He could feel that each fragment represented a hurdle in his life. If his mind was not strong enough, it would be easy to get lost. These were not important. What was important was Qinhao's words. The pressure was gradually increasing. Qinhao was in the Venerable Plane, and Zhou Wudao was in the Lower Renwan Plane. When they first came here, the mental power of the statues was not enough. They were only in the Saint Plane. It was difficult for them to exert any pressure. However, the pressure was already very obvious. Although it still couldn't stop the two of them, they could sense that the statues around them were all exalted realm cultivators. According to their inference, the further they went, the greater the pressure. So, at the end of the statues, was there a statue of an emperor that contained the will of the emperor? If you get any inspiration, remember, don't let it go. Stop immediately. This place can strengthen your plane. They are priceless treasures. Relics were rare and buried deep behind the fog. Qinhao knew their value very well. With the power of the statues, cultivators could break through their own limits at the fastest speed. Of course, the way to become stronger was different. Here, the improvement of the plane was the most obvious. Yes, Zhou Wudao nodded. He looked at Qinhao with a strange gaze. Why did his luck seem to have improved recently? First, he obtained the technique to open the power of the 9 palaces. Then, he came to this relic. As Qinhao walked, he was vigilant of his surroundings. He did not relax, nor did he let his joy get to his head. Did Tokugawa Shinichi deliberately lead them here to give them a big gift? The descendants of the Tokugawa shogunate were not idiots. Could it be that these strange statues had other uses? For the time being, Qinhao did not notice anything strange. Even if he did, he was not afraid. The remaining power of the divine blood in his body could still be maintained for a while. No matter what Tokugawa Shinichi's trump card was, it was enough to kill him. Continuing forward, walking among the venerable statues, Qinhao and Zhou Wudao slowed down a lot. In the process, many statues gave them a favorable impression. Waves of strong telekinesis were transmitted into their minds, trying to make them stay and inherit the legacy of the statues. However, Qinhao and Zhou Wudao were not tempted at all. With their cultivation, how could the venerables' statues keep them? even if each statue had reached the limit of its own domain and could be said to be the limit of a plane. After a while, Qin Hao and Zhou Wudao's foreheads were covered in sweat, and their footsteps were heavy. They had not yet reached the end of the Venerable's statue area. The statues in front of them were different from the statues they had encountered before. The telekinesis of these statues was extremely strong. Even though Qin Hao was invincible in the Venerable's realm, crossing a heavenly cycle and Zhou Wudao was a monarch, they still faced great resistance. One could imagine how powerful the last few dozen statues were. They must have surpassed the level 9 Venerables and reached the true limit of the Venerable's realm. Ha. Not bad, not bad. You actually made it this far. It's obvious that your cultivation has reached the limit of the Venerable's realm. It's extremely rare among Yuan Venerables, but this is the end. The road ahead is blocked. Tokugawa Shinichi actually appeared in public amidst the arrogant laughter and blocked the path ahead. He no longer looked like a stray dog. Instead, he was extremely confident. Finally can't resist throwing your life away, Qin Hao said coldly. Zhou Wudao's eyes narrowed as he silently drew his sword. Qin Hao had the ability to use Yuan Qi. Since Tokugawa Shinichi dared to take the initiative to appear, he definitely had something to rely on. Die! Tokugawa Shinichi shook his head. You'll be the ones to die. I accidentally found these ruins and cultivated here for 2 months. My understanding of them is far deeper than yours. I might as well be frank. You are about to die anyway. I am very generous to the dead. Borrowing the power of the statues can not only allow a martialist to break through their cultivation base, but once they fuse with them, they can also transfer the power of the statues into their bodies and stimulate unimaginable abilities. Furthermore, I am very lucky that there is more than one statue that can be fused with. Unfortunately, their power can only be used here. It is useless in the outside world. As soon as he said that, at the end of the Venerable's area, a huge statue holding a war blade that was much taller than the other statues suddenly emitted a ray of light that shone on Tokugawa Shinichi's body. In an instant, Tokugawa Shinichi's body flickered with an intense light. Strands of resplendent light flowed, like Yuan Qi. Education 123 Literature Network. Chapter 1381. Chanjian Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Who was fiercer? Countless statues stood in an unknown region behind a miasma. The scene was grand, solemn, and sacred. It was as if many strong cultivators had gathered here. Each statue was different. Some held swords, some held sabers, some held spears, and some played zither. It was as if a group of enlightened seniors were conveying the spirit of martial arts to their descendants. Anyone who comprehended one of them would benefit immensely. Comprehending the martial arts of the statues would not only make it easier for a cultivator to break through their cultivation level, but once their spirits merged, they could also transfer the power of the statues into their own bodies and obtain extraordinary abilities. The method of transmitting power was probably left behind by the statues to help the cultivators deeply understand the essence of martial arts and practice. However, Tokugawa Shinichi wanted to use the power of the statues to kill Qin Hao. When the dazzling light shone down, it flowed through Tokugawa Shinichi's body. In the flickering light, he looked very much like a cultivator releasing vitality. The power transmitted by the saber-wielding statue was naturally a saber technique. In an instant, Tokugawa Shinichi's saber chi increased greatly, exuding a powerful sharpness. No wonder he lured us here. He's fearless. Zhou Wudao looked a little cautious, but he wasn't nervous. If Qin Hao couldn't use vitality and was trapped in the world of the statues, Tokugawa Shinichi could do whatever he wanted. No one would be able to stop him. Unfortunately, Qin Hao was now in control of vitality. With his freakish methods, he was invincible under the Emperor realm. No matter how many statues Tokugawa Shinichi used, it didn't seem to change the outcome. Scared, Tokugawa Shinichi looked at the two of them wantonly. His eyes were full of mockery. Even if the white-haired cultivator obtained the ability to use vitality, it was no different from seeking death if he wanted to fight him. Yes, I'm a little scared. I'm scared that you'll still disappoint me after borrowing the power of the statues. Qin Hao reached out his hand. A jadeite sword appeared in his palm. He was once again enveloped in the blood-red light. The light rose and enveloped him. You're quite confident. However, after my attack, your confidence will turn into fear and despair. Tokugawa Shinichi pulled out his slender saber. Saber light appeared, and the light became more and more intense. It was as if the saber chi given to him by the statues was all absorbed by the saber. Saber chi editor. Endless fantasy translation. It was translation. Translation is cold eyes stared at Qin Hao. This attack combined the statue's sword comprehension and Tokugawa Shinichi's sword skills. It could be said that it was a combination of the strengths of both. Even here, Tokugawa Shinichi's ability was definitely stronger than it was in the outside world. Translation, translation, translation. Without any superfluous words, the blade slashed down. The blade aura was extremely long, cutting through the void. It was as if space had been cut in half. The light fell on Qin Hao's head. This attack had integrated the comprehension of the statue Blade Dao and had reached the peak of Tokugawa Shinichi's life. The raging power even knocked away all the statues near Qin Hao. Many of the statues collapsed midway, and fragments flew everywhere. Translation, 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 translation. How translation, translation. Zhou Wudao furrowed his brows. In the past, Tokugawa Shinichi's blade light was enough to kill a warrior at the peak of the Venerable Realm. Moreover, it was a warrior with an origin spirit. It seemed that the statue's comprehension of martial arts was indeed very strong. However, Zhou Wudao did not avoid it. He stood beside Qin Hao and was not worried about being injured. Even though Tokugawa Shinichi had borrowed the power of the statue, he was still too naive to think that he could defeat Qin Hao. Qin Hao didn't even bother to draw his sword. The silver armor covered his arm as he directly grabbed the blade. At this moment, a ball of flame ignited in Qin Hao's palm. The flame burned fiercely, and the blade sank into it. It couldn't move an inch, and it was gradually melting bit by bit. Is this the result of your 2 months of hard work? Qin Hao said sarcastically. Disappointing. Tokugawa Shinichi clenched his fist, and with a clench of his fist, the blade beam shattered. Tokugawa Shinichi staggered back a few steps from the recoil, and his face was filled with shock. The white-haired warrior was so strong. The blade-wielding statue he had borrowed power from was a peak Yuan Venerate entity with an unparalleled blade Dao. Among all the Venerate-level statues, only 1 or 2 of them could compare. Tokugawa Shinichi's blade Dao, which had fused with the statue's blade Dao, could be considered perfect. However, it had been broken by Qin Hao's crude palm strike. You still have 1 more chance to make a move. Qin Hao didn't care about the change in Tokugawa Shinichi's expression. After all, no matter how hard Tokugawa Shinichi tried, he wouldn't be able to change the outcome. Unless Tokugawa Shinichi merged with the Emperor's statue at the end of the statue and borrowed the power of the Emperor's statue, he might be able to slay Qin Hao. However, this was obviously impossible. Interesting. Tokugawa Shinichi suppressed the waves in his heart. As a descendant of the Tokugawa shogunate, he had naturally seen many battles and faced many life and death situations. The failure of this blade strike only surprised him, but didn't dampen his confidence. However, to be honest, the white-haired warrior was quite capable. Tokugawa Shinichi clenched his fist, and another ray of light shone down, enveloping Tokugawa Shinichi's body. In an instant, the surging light around him became thicker, and his blade, chi, became sharper. Looking in the direction of the second ray of light, Qin Hao discovered that it was also a statue holding a blade. However, the difference was that the second statue was holding a heavy blade. The heavy blade had no edge. It's already rare for an ordinary person to obtain the power of a statue. It's even more difficult to gain the favor of these venerate-level statues because they have very strong egos. However, I'm a genius of the Tokugawa clan. You don't have to be surprised that I obtained the enlightenment of 2 of the statues. As the second ray of light descended, Tokugawa Shinichi's confidence was rejuvenated, and his arrogance was even stronger. Although he spoke casually, it wasn't easy for him to move the second statue. He had spent a lot of time to do so. Even so, it was obvious that he was worthy of the title of genius. I hope you won't disappoint me again. Qin Hao continued to attack him, and his tone was still contemptuous. Humph! Tokugawa Shinichi was furious. He had never been looked down upon like this before. Moreover, Qin Hao had looked down on him more than once. The heavy blade had no edge. He raised it above his head, and endless light flowed on it. Blade Qi soared into the sky, and the blade Qi wreaked havoc in the void. Rumbling sounds were heard as the blade Qi raged in the void. This blade Qi was obviously about killing with strength. It could defeat 10 with brute force. However, no one knew how much Tokugawa Shinichi had comprehended and how much he could unleash. In the void, a giant blade was condensed from the endless blade Qi. It was as if it had descended from the 9 heavens, carrying with it the power to destroy everything. It seemed to be punishing the world. Under the pressure of this giant blade, the statues that were hundreds of feet tall seemed insignificant. As for Qin Hao, he was nothing more than an ant. This blade Qi is very domineering. It's as if it was born to destroy everything. It's hard to imagine what the person who created this blade skill had experienced. Qin Hao, don't underestimate it. Zhou Wudao only raised his head to take a look. He felt as if his whole body was sucked in, and his soul was about to be obliterated and torn apart by the giant blade. According to the power passed down from the void, this blade Qi was enough to kill a second-stage Emperor Realm Origin Soul Cultivator. It was still unknown whether Qin Hao could unleash his strongest power in his current state. Zhou Wudao had to remind him, "So you're saying that you're underestimating me?" Qin Hao smiled, but there was a touch of seriousness in his eyes. Tokugawa Shinichi, who was at the peak of the Venerable Realm, had the power to kill a second-stage Emperor Realm Origin Soul Cultivator after combining the power of 2 statues. The statue's understanding of martial arts was really strong. This further proved the value of the relic. If he could move them away, he could put dozens of them in Qian University. He could put dozens of them in Western Qin and give them to Ling Xiaoxue. It would be convenient for the disciples of Ling Yun School to comprehend the power of the statues. For the disciples, it was equivalent to changing their lives. Of course, Qin Hao would not forget his allies, the Nalen family of Western Wei, Western Zhao, the Wasteland, and his father-in-law, Xiao Yi. He could put hundreds of statues each. It was really beautiful. Well, if possible, Qin Hao decided to take all the statues. Die! Tokugawa Shinichi's face was fierce. He felt that he had been underestimated and humiliated again. He raised his blade and slashed down heavily. A strong whistling sound came from the void. The giant blade between heaven and earth suddenly fell straight down, blasting toward Qin Hao. Faced with an extremely domineering and destructive attack, Qin Hao's body grew in size. Tokugawa Shinichi's eyes were filled with shock. He saw that Qin Hao's face was covered with a layer of dragon scales. A power purer, more domineering, and crazier than the giant blade of the void was born. This power seemed to be born to destroy. Could one break through 10 moves? Qin Hao did not need to comprehend or use the statues. He was a living destroyer. Flame dragon whirling sky slash. Amidst the crazy roar, a huge, expanding fireball was born above Qin Hao's head. Inside the fireball, a dragon-shaped creature was flying and twisting. It wanted to break out and devour everything in the world. When the giant blade of the void fell, the fireball that had expanded to 100 meters away exploded. The dragon-shaped creature was like a monster that had been born. It roared and rushed into the sky. It flew all the way, and its dragon claws clashed with the giant blade. When the 2 sides collided, the heaven and earth trembled, and there was a violent sound wave. Then, The dragon claws tore the giant blade apart. The terrifying blade, Chi from before, was trampled by the dragon's power. It was like a lamb that had lost its will to fight. The giant blade of the void was completely torn apart, but the flame dragon did not disappear. It coiled in the void, its sacred body meandering. It let out a terrifying roar at the statue below. The dragon's roar rushed over. With a bang, the statue holding the heavy blade was destroyed and turned into ashes. Then, the flame dragon dissipated with satisfaction. What a pity, what a pity! Qinhao shook his head and sighed. The dragon's soul also had a spirit. How could it be angry at a statue? On the other side, Tokugawa Shinichi could not keep calm. He looked at everything in horror. His eyes were distorted and he was struggling. It was as if his faith had collapsed. The hand holding the blade was trembling. How could this be? Looking at the dragon scales on Qinhao's face, he could not understand what kind of monster he had encountered. It could easily destroy the power of the two statues that he had obtained. That power was enough to kill a second-level primitive emperor with the soul. Not only that, but even the statues were destroyed. When one of the statues was destroyed, the surging light of Tokugawa Shinichi dimmed. Even under the threat of the dragon's soul, the light on his body seemed to be faintly dissipating. It must be that the first statue was afraid and wanted to withdraw its telekinesis. Soul, you have a soul. Do you think I don't? I will kill you, kill you. Tokugawa Shinichi panicked for the first time. This was completely different from when he was chased. When he was chased by Qinhao, he did not have the ability to resist. Now that he had come to the world of statues, he thought that as long as he entered this world, he would be the true master and he could control everything. Unexpectedly, he could not deal with Qinhao. His mind was filled with blood. Tokugawa Shinichi's spirit was a little crazy. He stretched out his arms, and white mist appeared behind him. In the mist, a Yamada no Orochi appeared. Yamada no Orochi, the god worshipped by the Easter tribe. The Tokugawa clan was said to be the descendants of the god. Therefore, the blood of Yamada no Orochi flowed in their bodies. Naturally, their souls were the same. However, only a few people could manifest the complete body of Yamada no Orochi. Generally speaking, most of them were either Sanshi or Wuchi, depending on the individual's talent. Obviously, Tokugawa Shinichi had the noblest bloodline. It was enough to judge that he was the only direct prince of the Tokugawa clan. The Yamada no Orochi appeared, and the world was filled with an incomparably evil and dark aura. Its appearance was extremely ugly. It had 8 heads and 8 tails, and its body was huge. As it twisted in the air, it gave off a strong sense of oppression and deterrence, especially when Tokugawa Shinichi chanted a string of ancient spells. The body of Yamada no Orochi burst out with a dazzling light. A sword broke out of the snake's body and fell into Tokugawa Shinichi's hand. It was 2 souls in one body. Idiot! Tokugawa Shinichi, who was holding the Kusanagi sword, cursed at Qinhao. He was extremely angry. Idiot! Qinhao stepped back. It was not that he was afraid of fighting. Instead, Zhou Wudao walked out. However, at this moment, Zhou Wudao's state was completely different from before. Black crows were flying around his body, emitting waves of strange cries. Behind him, there was also a mass of white fog. Within the fog, an evil Taotai giant beast appeared. Its open mouth was like a bottomless black hole. It could never be full and wanted to devour everything. What was more strange was that Zhou Wudao stretched out his arms. 3 beams of dazzling light poured into his head from different angles. At this moment, Zhou Wudao had reached the peak of his life. He was even stronger than when he fought with Qinhao. Is it difficult to obtain the power of the statues? Genius? Are you worthy of being called a genius in front of me? Zhou Wudao looked at Tokugawa Shinichi coldly. The power he used to activate his soul naturally came from the power of the statues. However, Tokugawa Shinichi had only obtained 2 statues after cultivating for 2 months. Zhou Wudao had obtained 3 on the first day. What was even more frightening was that the rays of light shining from them were the existence that Tokugawa Shinichi was afraid of, because the two statues were not weaker than the saber-wielding statue. Moreover, Zhou Wudao had borrowed 3 statues. Divine beasts of the Eastern tribe, come and have a taste of my ancient fierce beast. Zhou Wudao stretched his arm forward. The giant beast behind him roared and swallowed everything. He had been injured by Tokugawa Shinichi before and was mocked for being weak. Now he wanted to see who was weak. Chapter 1382. Translator. Nyoibo, Studio Editor. Nyoibo, Studio. The end of the statue borrowing the power of the statue. He summoned his soul. In the air, the two beasts faced each other. The Yamata serpent danced, and the Taodai swallowed everything. The killing intent in their eyes grew more and more intense. Zhou Wudao's feet left the ground, and black crows circled around him. He released an arrogant aura and looked down at Tokugawa Shinichi. Now that both souls were released, he had found his true self, the prince of the great Zhou dynasty who looked down on all the geniuses in the Emperor martial arts competition. Kill. Tokugawa Shinichi said coldly. His soul power surged, and the Kusanagi sword shone with dazzling light. The Yamata no Orochi also attacked. The snakehead stretched out and spat out a stream of lava. It was unstoppable and spread forward to burn the Taodai. Roar! The Taodai opened its greedy, beastly mouth and sucked the lava into its mouth, ignoring the burning of the flames. Is this considered fire? Zhou Wudao sneered. Compared to Qin Hao's soul fire, it was too weak. Of course not. Tokugawa Shinichi was not discouraged. He was surprisingly calm. He pointed his finger, and the Yamata no Orochi stretched out another head and spat out a stream of cold air. Dual attribute soul power. Zhou Wudao was a little surprised. There are many types of souls. Some of the more special souls were born with multiple abilities. For example, the ice bird was good at flying and also had the ice attribute. Tokugawa Shinichi's soul, the Yamata no Orochi, was the same. The stream of cold air raged like a blizzard in lava, forming a terrifying dual power of ice and fire that poured into the Taoya's mouth. Even so, it cannot be shaken. Wind. Tokugawa Shinichi said the third word. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew in the air. The Yamata no Orochi stretched out its third head and spat out a wind blade more than 10 feet long. The wind blade spun and slashed into the Taoya's black mouth. Thunder. Light. Rock. He spat out the words one after another, and with every word, a brand new power was born. In the blink of an eye, wind, rain, lightning, light, ice, fire, rock, wood, and a total of 8 attribute energies interweaved together, causing space to be dazzling and resplendent as it was filled with boundless light, causing the scene to be rather magnificent. Numerous, surging, and formidable attacks blasted into the Taoya's mouth. Qin Hao calmly watched. He had to admit that Tokugawa Shinichi was a genius. His inherited family source spirit was almost perfect, and he had all kinds of abilities. Even in the 4 regions, there would be few who could match him. Ordinary people would not be able to defeat him. Especially after the combination of the 8 powers, it formed a brand new terrifying impact. Even the powerful ancient Taodai was forced to take a few steps back in the face of such a violent attack. However, that was all. As Zhou Wudao's soul power increased, the Taodai beast phantom stood firm once again, and the devouring power it released became even stronger. Zhou Wudao is at the 2nd level of the Emperor realm, so he has an absolute advantage in terms of soul power. The 3 statues also give him a longer time to awaken his origin soul. Qin Hao had already seen that Tokugawa Shinichi, who had lost the telekinesis transmission of the heavy sword statue, was so tired that he was sweating profusely. Even if Zhou Wudao did not attack intensively, he would not be able to hold on. Not to mention that Zhou Wudao had yet to use his full strength. Kusanagi Cloud Slash. Tokugawa Shinichi saw that he could not defeat the Taoya's devouring power. If this continued, he would collapse from exhaustion first. He rose into the air and stopped above the heads of Yamada, No, Orochi. The Kusanagi cloud sword erupted with an incomparably intense radiance. At this moment, he used the ninth power metal. Swish, 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 countless sword auras flew out. The Kusanagi cloud sword slashed out. Streaks of sharp sword auras mixed with the attacks of the 8 snake heads and entered the endless mouths of the Taudai. Tokugawa Shinichi's continuous slashes were very violent. His sword was condensed with soul power, so it was even more powerful than an ordinary venerable weapon. The sword auras kept entering, and cracks gradually appeared on the Taoye's body. From the cracks, sword auras wreaked havoc. It was as if Zhou Wudao's origin soul would be destroyed in the next second. However, there was no trace of worry on Zhou Wudao's face. He sneered. "Used up your trump card? Next, it's my turn." As soon as he finished speaking, 3 balls of light broke through Zhou Wudao's body. His left palm, right palm, and right ankle were penetrated by the light, filling the air with an incomparably turbulent power. It was the power of 3 palaces. Roar! His body was strengthened, and so was his soul beast. The Taoye's right leg stomped, and the void trembled. The beast's mouth that could devour all things not only endured the opponent's attack, but also showed signs of devouring Orochi. The distance between the two was constantly shrinking. Orochi, which was coiled in the void, was completely helpless. How can it be completely ineffective? Tokugawa Shinichi's face was very pale. The telekinesis transmitted by the statue could not keep up with the consumption of his soul power. Moreover, his invincible and violent attacks were ineffective against the monster in front of him. The Taodai seemed to never be full. This had never happened before. Opponents of the same level, even if they were rare geniuses, could only withstand the bombardment of 4 elements at the same time. Yet, he could use 9 powers, which made him the undisputed number 1 in the Tokugawa clan. There was no time to think. A scream was heard. The opponent, who seemed to be on par with him, underwent an earth-shattering change. Due to the lack of follow-up power, his soul power was emptied. Tokugawa Shinichi and Orochi flew into the Taoye's mouth at the same time, as if they were falling into a bottomless abyss. "I'll return it to you." Devouring people? Zhou Wudao did not have such a hobby. Devouring Tokugawa Shinichi was disgusting to him. He turned his palm and slapped forward. Suddenly, lightning shot out from the Taoye's mouth, mixed with ice, magma, wind blades, and rocks. Tokugawa Shinichi's previous attacks were all used on him. His telekinesis was almost depleted, and Orochi's soul had even disappeared. Now, Tokugawa Shinichi was no different from an ordinary person. Facing such a terrifying attack, how could he resist? When a 9-elemental attack came, he was instantly turned into a sieve. His body was pierced by hundreds of light rays. Wind blades slashed at him, and his limbs were separated from his body. It was a tragic sight. "Tell me, who is the weak chicken?" Looking down coldly at the human stick under his feet, Zhou Wudao looked at the Japanese who had crossed the ocean. At this moment, Tokugawa Shinichi's naked body was half covered in ice, and the other half was burned into a bloody mess. He no longer had the arrogant and cruel face from before. Instead, his eyes were filled with fear and cowardice. "I've lost. I admit defeat, but please don't kill me. I still want to live. This famous blade of the Tokugawa shogunate is yours." Zhou Wudao pointed a finger. A black crow flew out from his finger and pierced Tokugawa Shinichi's forehead. "I'll take the famous blade, but I'll also take your life." Without looking at the corpse, Zhou Wudao bent down and picked up the sword that Tokugawa Shinichi had used before. He held it in his hand and waved it twice. It was very light and very sharp. The material was obviously not ordinary. With a smile on his face, he handed it to Qin Hao. "An imperial weapon. I'll give it to you as a souvenir. It's hard to get things from the Japanese." "I don't care." Qin Hao ignored him and stepped forward. "Don't. How about I give you a few Japanese women one day? I heard that they're very good at serving people." Zhou Wudao hurried to follow him. "Keep them for yourself. But there's one thing. Don't have children with them. It'll taint the bloodline of the Japanese." The blood-red halo that covered Qin Hao's body had completely dissipated. It meant that the power of the divine blood had been used up. He looked at the statues, looking for the one that was suitable for him to comprehend. Zhou Wudao's expression was a little strange. I'm also a little doubtful. Are you really from Western Liang? Was it really a family from the East Continent that was forced to come to Western Liang? Tell me, and I'll avenge you. Don't be annoying. Qin Hao glared at him. Why didn't I see you talk so much when we were on the ship? You're proud just because you killed a Japanese? What do you think are the chances of winning against Lei Jiao? Zhou Wudao's mouth twitched. Although he didn't see the battle between Lei Jiao and Qin Hao on the West Mountain, he had heard of this person. After all, they were both from the East Continent. How could he not know Lei Chuan, a genius from the Judgment Hall? That guy is a monster. Let's split it 60-40. I'll take 60, he'll take 40. Of course, at the same time that I kill him, I may suffer extremely heavy injuries. Zhou Wudao was very self-aware about this point. What if we add Feng Qianli from the Zhuiying Sword Palace, Fairy Qianning from the Yaoshui Holy Kingdom, and the martial artist from the Ghost Region? Qin Hao said. Suddenly, Zhou Wudao shut up. Hurry up and cultivate before they arrive. Qin Hao patted him on the shoulder. They still faced a big problem. Those people would definitely come after them. It was only a matter of time before they entered the statue world. At present, the only advantage they had was time. They had to seize the limited time to control as much of the statue's telekinesis as possible and make it stronger. Yes, Zhou Wudao nodded. Then he bowed in 3 directions. When he fought with Tokugawa Shinichi, he obtained the telekinesis of the 3 statues. He only borrowed it temporarily. He didn't intend to inherit his legacy and cultivate his martial arts. After all, he was more farsighted. If he had to choose a statue that was truly suitable for him, he should at least choose it in the Emperor District. But just now he had no choice. After this bow, the 3 beams of light flew away from Zhou Wudao. The statues seemed to be very intelligent. They knew Zhou Wudao's inner thoughts. Even so, they still lent their power to him. It could be seen that the statues here had a selfless spirit. The strong left their telekinesis here only to pass on their life's knowledge to their descendants and help them improve. If some people were very talented, they wouldn't force them. Instead, they would be more than happy to let them challenge stronger existences. This was the purest world of martial arts. They were the most selfless instructors. They walked all the way through the Venerable District. After another 10 meters, both Qin Hao and Zhou Wudao couldn't go any further. The statues on both sides of the road were extremely pressurizing. It was as if strong cultivators were watching them. If they couldn't break through this layer of pressure, they couldn't go any further. I've reached my limit. Zhou Wudao's legs trembled. He sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. His spirit merged with the emperor statue on the right. Qin Hao also sat down. It wasn't that he couldn't hold on. If he forced himself to continue, he guessed that he could go another 5 or 6 meters. But at this time, there was a statue on the left. It held a furnace in its palm and transmitted a vast flame intent to him. This intent attracted Qin Hao's attention. He had to stop and comprehend it. Of course, Qin Hao's ambition didn't lie here. Comprehension was comprehension. He wouldn't really integrate into the other's world. In fact, he wanted to know if there was really an emperor statue at the end of the endless statues. Before that, he needed to recover some of his strength. For example, he needed to borrow his telekinesis to open his origin soul. If he opened his origin soul, Qin Hao could go further and explore the end of the statues. They sat there for a long time. Qin Hao and Zhou Wudao calmed down and comprehended the understanding of martial arts transmitted by the statues, until a series of footsteps slowly sounded. Education 123 Literature Network. Chapter 1383. Translator. Transin Editor. Transin, who is your father? The sound of footsteps could be heard. Qin Hao and Zhou Wudao stopped their cultivation and looked back, only to see several figures approaching. The one in the lead was a man with a serious expression on his face. He was burly and fierce, exuding a wild and sharp aura. It was actually Lei Jiao and the others from Lei Chuan's Judgment Hall who had arrived here for the first time, not Xinyuan Pingji. Behind Lei Jiao, a group of figures appeared one after another. There was Feng Qianli from Tianju Sword Palace, Fairy Qianning from Water Jade Holy Empire, Celestial Cliff Cultivators, and Ghost Desolate Cultivators. Qin Hao sat quietly. He wasn't too surprised. According to the traces of his fight with the Eastern Japanese, it was easy to find the direction. There was only one way out of the cliff behind the mountain, so it was within everyone's expectations that they would find this place. However, being the first to find Qin had to not conflict with how many people came in. Because of his high talent, Lei Jiao was weaker under the pressure of the statue, so his speed was naturally much faster than the Xinyuan family. Therefore, Qin Hao did not rule out the possibility that Xinyuan Pingji had also entered the ruins and would appear soon. You guys are really persistent. Qin Hao glanced at Lei Jiao. Lei Jiao was silent. His eyes flashed, and the hatred on his face was undisguised. He had never been tempted like this. In the battle behind the mountain, Qin Hao had played him like a monkey, which was no different from humiliating his intelligence. But if they wanted to get to the bottom of it, they could only blame themselves for being too greedy. You continue to cultivate, I will deal with them. Zhou Wudao stood up and stepped forward, blocking the middle. His current state was better than Qin Hao's, and he had the priority to enter the ruins. Even if Lei Jiao had many extraordinary people, Zhou Wudao would not be afraid of them. Get out of the way. Lei Jiao issued a low warning. He was not unfamiliar with Zhou Wudao and did not want to be enemies with him. Lei Jiao, he does not have the inheritance of the great emperor. Everything is just a farce. Why are you so stubborn? If you really want to fight, what good will it do you? Zhou Wudao did not move, using his actions to show his position. It has nothing to do with the inheritance of the great emperor. He played me on the mountain. If it is you, can you bear it? Get out of my way. Lei Jiao's heavy foot took a step forward, and this step caused a tremor. Looks like there's no room for discussion. All right, I'll be frank. I'll protect Qin Hao. If you want to kill him, you'll have to get past me first. Come on. Zhou Wudao's arrogance was awe-inspiring. Unwilling to yield, he also took a step forward. No matter how strong the Thunder Flood Dragon was, it wasn't strong enough to wantonly behave atrociously in front of him. Lei Jiao suddenly frowned. Since Zhou Wudao had said this, it was clear that he was determined. As a genius of the East Continent, he knew that it would not be easy to defeat Zhou Wudao. Moreover, the other party dared to stand out even though they had the advantage in numbers. They must have something to rely on. When they first entered the ruins, the statues had extremely strong psyche power, so they could feel it. However, until now, they had not had enough time to figure out what telekinesis was all about. This pressing step actually intimidated the various geniuses for the time being. No one stepped forward to test Zhou Wudao's confidence. Regardless of whether it was Feng Qianli or Fairy Qianning, although they both harbored hatred or resentment towards Qin Hao, Zhou Wudao was quite famous among the younger generation of the East Continent. He did not speak much ruthlessly to the person who came, but he would never speak empty words. He was so confident and decisive. Who would dare try? The dignified prince of the great Zhou Empire actually learned to be someone else's dog. A teasing voice came from behind. Lei Jiao and the others looked back. Accompanied by a figure dressed in men's clothing, but with a flawless face, stepped into the field. The various geniuses couldn't help but be shocked. Even the fairy-like Qianning fairy, looking at the face that made other women jealous, made her lose some of her noble temperament in an instant. Qing Jihan, Zhou Wudao, quietly clenched his fists. Of course, he wasn't nervous about the other party's appearance, but because this woman was not only beautiful, but her strength could also be called monstrous. In front of her, Zhou Wudao had no chance of winning, not even 10%. And he was even more clear that in this relic filled with telekinesis, Qing Jihan's ability would be infinitely magnified. This was her most proficient spiritual domain. With her attainments, it was impossible for her not to see that the statue's telekinesis could be borrowed. This is troublesome. Just by showing his face, Zhou Wudao's forehead was oozing with sweat. "Who is she?" Qin Hao asked. He was naturally aware of Zhou Wudao's subtle changes. And this dangerous woman dressed in men's clothing. Qin Hao also met her at Yunming Mountain. If it wasn't for her words that affected the situation, the relationship between Lei Jiao and Qin Hao might not be so bad. The East Continent's #1 empire, Daqin's Empress Lingxuan's daughter, Qingji Han, with the reputation of being the #1 princess. Zhou Wudao's eyebrows trembled. Facing Lei Jiao, he still had the confidence to win. Facing Qingji Han, he had to admit that he was not her opponent. Buzz. As if a huge wave suddenly rushed into his mind, Qin Hao was stunned on the spot. Obviously, he was caught off guard. Qingji Han, the East Continent's princess of Daqin, praised by all countries as the #1 princess, Empress Lingxuan's daughter. She was married. You should know my strength very well. Mo Xian and Lei Jiao. If we fight, I won't put them in my eyes. But Qingji Han, I am not her opponent. Qin Hao, run away. We can't afford to offend this woman at all. She is a demon. Zhou Wudao's face showed a rare smile, as if he was mocking himself. Originally, he thought that by taking the initiative to enter the relic and awakening the original soul with telekinesis, no matter who he faced, he could resist everything. But Qingji Han was born with the terrible ability to control the spirit. Her original soul was also related to the power of telekinesis. She was very strong, as if she was born the favorite of the god of spirit, with all the unique talents. With her perception of the power of telekinesis, there were no secrets in this world of statues. She could use all the methods. Even here, she was qualified to be on the same level as the gods. To put it bluntly, maybe in the outside world, they could try to resist, but in this world of telekinesis, even if Qin Hao joined forces, Zhou Wudao had no confidence to defeat Qingji Han. The atmosphere was a little quiet. With the arrival of Qingji Han, Lei Jiao and the others subconsciously moved away and took the initiative to make a path. Qin Hao and Zhou Wudao only exchanged a few words, but the two of them had a great turbulence in their hearts. Phew! Qin Hao exhaled a breath of air and slowly got up. Then he walked past Zhou Wudao and stood in front of Qingji Han. His heart was still very complicated. Cultivate? How could he continue to cultivate? The princess of Daqin in the East Continent, the daughter of Empress Lingxian. Qin Hao said the name a little awkwardly, even though the name was very familiar to him. Looking at Qin Hao's face, Qingji Han's eyelashes fluttered slightly. If someone else asked her this, she would directly ignore it. What kind of status did she have to explain to others? But at this time, when Qin Hao asked her, Qingji Han suddenly didn't know how to answer, let alone ignore it. She didn't know why she had this strange feeling. Obviously, she was not familiar with Qin Hao. At most, she secretly peeped at this man's face for a few months. Why do you not look like her at all? Who is your father? Qin Hao continued. His tone was very strange, as if he was an elder questioning a junior. He looked at Qingji Han's face. She didn't inherit Han Lingxuan's outline, nor did she have Zhang Wu's edges. Many powerful people in the East Continent in his previous life flashed through his mind. It seemed that Qingji Han didn't look like anyone. Who exactly was her father? It's none of your business. Qin Hao was very tall. Although Qingji Han was not short, half a head taller than an ordinary woman, she still looked a little petite in front of Qin Hao. She inexplicably took a small step back. Perhaps even she didn't notice this movement. She only knew that her heart was suddenly very flustered. She secretly peeped at Qin Hao for a few months. Today's confrontation at such a close distance made her a little uncomfortable. Well, it's none of my business. Qin Hao put his hands behind his back and looked up at the sky. He let out a sigh that made everyone confused. What's going on? Lei Jiao and his junior in the sect looked at each other. The answer was inexplicable. It's a little strange. Feng Qianli and Fairy Qianning were a little uncomfortable. Weren't they here to seek revenge? Why did Qin Hao seem to be holding a parent-teacher conference for them? It doesn't matter if you don't want to say it. There are many mysteries in these ruins. Inside each statue, there are many predecessors' understandings of martial arts. That is a precious wealth. If you carefully comprehend it, whether it is breaking through your own realm or improving your martial skills, you will benefit endlessly. Oh, and with the help of the statue's telekinesis, you can temporarily regain control of your yuan qi and awaken the power of your soul. It will be more convenient for you to practice the Tao you have comprehended. After Qin Hao finished speaking, he turned and continued walking towards the depths of the ruins. He didn't fuse with the flame statue's ultimate technique, but he had already grasped the essence of it. After several deductions, he could completely understand it. However, the inheritance of the flame statue's Taoist art was clearly not enough to move Qin Hao. Therefore, the Tao technique should be left to others. Qin Hao's words made everyone shudder. After stepping into the ruins, at first, everyone thought that the statues could impart Tao. After all, along the way, Lei Jiao and the others had received many favorable impressions from the statues. However, using telekinesis to awaken the soul, they really didn't know this move. If there was a conflict with Zhou Wudao, then in an instant, everyone was scared. Perhaps many people would have died. However, Qin Hao said it without reservation. He didn't know what death was. Are you crazy? You told her everything? Zhou Wudao hurriedly chased over. Lei Jiao and the others didn't know the use of telekinesis. He could completely catch them off guard. At this time, everyone knew that it was equivalent to Qin Hao digging his own grave and pushing their situation to hell. Don't be so stingy. Even if you don't say it, they will know sooner or later, Qin Hao said. Suddenly kill everyone with one blow? It wouldn't be that easy. Who didn't have a life-saving method? If Zhou Wudao really fought and ruined the relationship, the consequences might be even more serious. Now, that Qin Hao said it selflessly, it was more or less a favor. As long as Lei Jiao and the others had a little conscience, they wouldn't be so narrow-minded and kill him. Of course, the most important point was to tell Qingji Han. No matter who her father was, after all, she was Han Lingshuan's daughter. After the incident with Xiao Han, Qin Hao looked down on his previous life very lightly. For the rest of his life, he might spend more energy and time on taking care of the people around him that he should cherish, friends, brothers, and teachers. As for Han Lingxian and Zhang Wu, as long as they didn't take the initiative to provoke him, let bygones be bygones. It was just an empire, a man who was about to become a god. Why should he care? Education 123 Literature Network. Chapter 1384. Grand Alliance, Assemble. Qin Hao left calmly, ignoring the geniuses behind him, which made people feel a little at a loss. This was completely different from what they had expected when they came. There was no friction or conflict. Lei Jiao's eyes still flashed with hatred, but at the same time, he understood that Qin Hao had taken the initiative to tell him the secret of the ruins. He intended to avoid the two sides becoming hostile, which was a concession. If he let Zhou Wudao make a move, the sudden burst of power would bring great harm to everyone. Who would suffer the consequences more? The warriors of the Celestial Cliffs, Fairy Qian Ning, and the others naturally saw through it. Even if they were unwilling, it seemed that they could only let it go. After all, they were the ones who started the trouble first. If it weren't for the inheritance of the great emperor, everyone wouldn't have been hurt. Now it seemed that Qin Hao really didn't have the inheritance of the great emperor. When the remaining two warriors of the Ghost Wilderness looked at Qin Hao, their killing intent was still very deep. It was just that in the current situation, they didn't have the ability to take revenge. After all, they entered the ruins one step later and lost the opportunity. If they didn't figure out how to borrow the power of the statue, they might even lose their lives, let alone revenge. Even so, the two would never give up so easily. There was more time in the future. Perhaps in addition to getting a place as a disciple of the Divine Palace, assassinating Qin Hao would be a good new goal. The revenge of the warriors of the Ghost Wilderness must be paid with the enemy's life. It doesn't seem appropriate to leave like this. The others didn't say anything, but Feng Qianli of the Zhuiying Sword Palace didn't want to let Qin Hao go. Qin Hao turned around, smiled faintly, and asked in a very cold tone, "Then what do you want? I'll be happy to accompany you." As his voice fell, A beam of light shone down and enveloped Zhou Wudao's body. Suddenly, the soul power in his body surged, and wisps of black gas turned into countless black crows flying. The tyrannical vitality surged out, forming a huge flame, which made the faces of the two Zhuang Sword Palace disciples beside Feng Qianli change greatly. "Senior brother, what should we do?" One of them was quite nervous. They had never borrowed the power of the statue, and even if they did, they might not be Zhou Wudao's opponent. At this moment, the two Zhuang Sword Palace disciples complained in their hearts. Why did their senior brother have to provoke others with words? Feng Qianli didn't expect Qin Hao to change his attitude so quickly. It was as if he was a completely different person from before. He called out Qin Hao to stop because he wanted to ridicule him and disgust him. He didn't want to fight for real. But now, under Qin Hao's command, Zhou Wudao directly revealed his source soul. It seemed that he had no choice but to fight. Feng Qianli's eyelids twitched. Were they really going to fight? "I kill you!" A sudden shout came from behind, interrupting Feng Qianli's speech, following which a towering killing intent gushed forth. A silhouette wielding a spear dashed forth. Even before the silhouette arrived, the spear had already pierced out, aiming for Qin Hao's chest. This spear technique was very skillful and exquisite. Although it didn't use Yuan Qi, it vaguely mobilized the general momentum of the statue in the world of ruins. Several thin wisps of psychic power were infected by the spear technique, transmitting wisps of light that merged into the spear technique. Suddenly, the power of the spear bloomed. It was extremely astonishing, rolling up a storm. The spearhead spurted out an unparalleled light, turning into a tornado that swept forward, trying to strangle and bury Qin Hao. It was Xianyuan Pingji. Behind him, dozens of figures of the younger generation of the Xianyuan family were chasing after him, each with monstrous killing intent. "You overestimate yourself." Zhou Wudao's expression was disdainful. With a flip of his hand, he was about to kill him. However, someone moved faster. As Xianyuan Pingji thrust out his spear, two silhouettes suddenly fell from the sky, blocking in front of Qin Hao. The two silhouettes, one tall and one short, one strong and one thin, also threw a punch at Xianyuan Pingji, but the power of the two punches was equal, full of endless violence. "Brother Melon, Luo Yuliang." Qin Hao was overjoyed. They came really fast. Boom! With a deafening sound, the two punches blocked the spear beam and tore apart the storm on Xianyuan Pingji's spear. When the storm tore apart, the spear flew out of Xianyuan Pingji's hand. Xianyuan Pingji vomited a mouthful of blood as he slammed heavily to the ground. "Brother!" Qin Hao, Luo Yuliang, and Xiaohua turned around at the same time and greeted with a smile. Whoosh! 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 Following that, figures descended. They were Zheng Qingqi, Xiao Han, Ke the five warriors of the Zheng family, the Knight Azura Palace disciples led by Yi Yao, and the people from Arhut Hall. However, what surprised Qin Hao the most was the youth in the crowd who was about his height. The youth carried a halberd on his back. "Cousin." Qin Hao's heart surged. It was great that his cousin was safe and sound. "Do you only have eyes for your cousin?" Aka walked out and glared at Qin Hao with a grumbling look. "Cousin-in-law." Qin Hao chuckled. After the Emperor Martial Tournament, he had heard that Qin Yun and Aku had held a wedding banquet in the wasteland. The love-hate relationship between the two had finally come to fruition. "We rushed here day and night. Fortunately, nothing happened to you. I was worried for 3 days and 3 nights, Qin Yun reprimanded. According to the disciples of Arhut Hall, the Xianyuan family group had no less than 600 to 700 people. Qin Hao had risked his life by spreading the false news of the great emperor's inheritance at Cloud Mist Mountain. When they rushed here and met Xiaohua at the foot of the mountain, they learned that everything had been done to lure them here so that everyone could reunite. Even though the journey had been tiring, Qin Yun could not bear to blame Qin Hao. Qin Hao revealed a helpless expression. It was better for one person to be in danger than to implicate the entire group. It was fine to suffer a little, but Qin Yun and Aku had come. Are you the only ones? Looking at Qin Yun and Aku, Qin Hao could not see Yi Shuihan and Chen Wanqin. His fiery heart immediately cooled. Of course not. Amidst the familiar laughter, Chen Wanqin slowly walked over from afar. Beside her were the disciples of the Southern Wuk Sword sect and Shou Wuk himself. Wanqin. Qin Hao stepped forward and sized up Chen Wanqin's facial features. They had not seen each other for more than a year. The young girl who had almost been taken advantage of by Xia Zhuoliu had become more dignified and mature as she grew older. Be careful. Chen Wanqin blushed under Qin Hao's gaze. She secretly glanced at Xiao Han. This guy did not care about his wife's jealousy at all. However, Xiao Han's gaze seemed to be smiling. What did she mean? Ahem, Brother Qin Hao, you have offended quite a number of people. Shou Wuk was not used to being ignored. He was the #1 rising star of the Southern Mountain Range. Even Yu Qianyang looked up to him. At this moment, Shou Wuk's sword-like eyes stared at Feng Qianli. His intuition told him that this person was a very strong sword cultivator. Just as Shou Wuk appeared, Feng Qianli's attention also shifted from Qin Hao to Shou Wuk. He could feel an extremely strong sword intent from Shou Wuk. This pure and flawless sword intent seemed to be innate. It gave him a strong sense of danger. This was something he had never experienced from any sword cultivator of the same generation in the East Continent. At the same time, Luo Yuliang and many disciples of the Arhut Palace also stared at Lei Jiao. Luo Yuliang even deliberately shook his 2 pecs at Lei Jiao. Yi Yao and Little Jiao focused their attention on the 2 ghost wilderness martial artists. After all, within the same domain, experts were very sensitive to other experts. Assassination was the ability that Little Jiao and Yi Yao were good at. Yes, many people don't like me. Qin Hao began to smile playfully. Physical martial cultivation, well, the friends of the Arhut Palace should like Lei Jiao very much. As for whether Jing Sword Emperor or Wuk Sword Emperor was stronger, today, it might be tested on Shou Wuk and Feng Qianli. The chances of a ghost wilderness martial artist winning against Little Jiao were very small. Even Yi Yao might not be Little Jiao's opponent. Of course, it would take a lot of time for Little Jiao to grow. At present, Yi Yao was still stronger. It was a pity that Yi Shuihan was not here. If he was here, he could experience the water control methods of the fairies of the Water Jade Holy Empire. Probably still on the way, Qin Hao thought. Qin Yun, Aku, Wanqin, and Little Jiao were all fine. As the only son of the Dragon Abyss Great Emperor, Yi Shuihan's talent was even stronger than everyone else. Qin Hao did not believe that he would be buried in the inland sea. Oh, everyone is here. It seems that we came a little late. Right at this moment, that annoying voice finally rang out. When Qin Hao looked over, he saw that Yi Shuihan had already walked in front of him. Her eyes were filled with tears that she couldn't help but cry. I knew it. Boss deliberately spread the news. The real purpose was to lead us here and let everyone reunite. I actually knew it long ago, boss. Yi Shuihan hugged Qin Hao tightly and choked with sobs. No matter when, no matter what the situation was, the boss was still the boss. For everyone, he would rather bear the danger alone. If he thought about it carefully, the siege at Yunming Mountain was very dangerous. Compared to that, Yi Shuihan's proposal to rely on himself to break through the South Sea was too childish. At this moment, he blamed himself. It's good that you're fine. The rest is not important. Qin Hao patted Yi Shuihan's back. When he looked up, he found that there was a person standing behind Yi Shuihan. It was an old friend that he could not even dream of. Sister Ingchong. Qin Hao quickly opened the warehouse and rubbed his eyes. Could it be that his eyes were playing tricks on him? Why was it so clear and real? Silly boy, you're not dreaming. Yining Chong chuckled and pointed to several people beside her. Qin Hao looked over and found that they were a group of swordsmen. A group of extraordinary swordsmen, especially a young man standing beside Yining Chong with a broadsword on his back. He was very tall and straight, and his momentum was not inferior to that of Shou Wuk. Obviously, he was a very strong person. More importantly, when Qin Hao looked at them, he could feel an indescribable sense of familiarity. My surname is Zhan, and my name is Yi, the young man with the broadsword said. Qin Hao was shocked and nodded. Just the surname was enough to make him understand a lot. As for why I left Xi'an University, I'll explain to you later. Now, let's deal with this small matter first. Yining Chang's tone became cold. When she said this, it was as if the air had frozen. People from Arhut Palace, Wuxword Sect, Zhan Yi, and the others stood together with Xiaohua, Yi Yao, and the people from the Zheng tribe. Sisan was also there. Sisan was no longer the gang leader. He had disbanded the gang and decided to follow Qin Hao. When several small teams gathered, each team had more than 10 people. Now, behind Qin Hao, there were 60 to 70 people. In front of any of the forces in Fallen Emperor Bay, it was not a small force. Especially in the teams, everyone had the ability to take charge. They were all geniuses among geniuses, and their overall combat power was raised by another level. Not to mention, Qin Hao and Zhou Wudao were two tyrannical existences. Shou Wuk and Zhan Yi were not inferior to Zhou Wudao. Irrelevant people get lost. Zhan Yi spat out a cold voice. His sharp gaze swept across Lei Jiao and the others. At this time, the teams were gathered. Naturally, they were not afraid of Lei Jiao. Instead, it was because a mighty army was slowly approaching. There were not many of them, only about 100 or so. Their steps were uniform, and the person standing at the front of the army had a face like jade. His snow-white hair fluttered in the wind. He was gritting his teeth at Qin Hao. Education 123 Literature Network. Chapter 1385. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Proving himself, Changhe Lo stared ahead. This time, they entered the Cloud Mist Mountains to kill Qin Hao. It could be said that they had mobilized all their forces, leaving not a single soldier behind. In the end, the 700 people were reduced by more than 200. Almost half of them were killed by traps in all kinds of strange ways. A small number of them were killed by Qin Hao, including Xin Yuan Jie himself. On the eastern mountainside, Qi Yuan left the team with his men. Obviously, it was impossible for him to return. Murong Zijuan was betrayed by Zhou Wudao and died on the peak. The Xin Yuan family was torn apart by Xin Yuan Jie's death. No one could unite the family. Although they were gathered together, it was unrealistic for Changhe Lo to take them for his own use. On the other hand, Qin Hao was not only fine after being chased, but also had many experts gathered around him. It was not difficult for Changhe Lo to see that Yishui Han, Qin Yun, Zhan Yi, and the others were all outstanding people. There was no lack of experts who could compete with him. Shou Wuk had been famous in the southern mountain range for a long time and was praised as the number one of the younger generation. He was on one level, and the other geniuses were on another level. Not to mention Changhe Lo, even Yu Qianyang of the Blazing Sun Temple was defeated by Shou Wuk's Sword Realm in Golden Light City. In addition, there was Zhou Wudao. Changhe Lo was not familiar with Zhou Wudao, but Murong Zijuan spoke highly of him and talked about him every day. After hearing it, it was inevitable that his scalp would go numb and he would feel uneasy. Looking at the situation, it would be difficult to touch Qin Hao again. Changhe Lo had a self-mocking sneer on his lips. Hundreds of people surrounded one person. Not only did they not kill him, but as hunters, they also suffered losses and their alliance fell apart. Let's bet our lives. Do you want to fight? Qin Hao shouted. One battle to determine victory and defeat. The winner would live, and the dead would be eliminated. It would be a complete end. The Divine Palace is right in front of us. If we use the power of the statue to break through, the power will be at our fingertips. If we fight now, wouldn't it spoil the scenery? Changhe Lo restrained the hatred in his eyes and put on a smile. Retreat. They would retreat and not let Qin Hao decide. Between power and hatred, the former was more precious. Revenge was a dish best served cold. He would not be blinded by hatred. Changhe Lo, Xin Yuan Pingji crawled up from the ground, blue veins popping out his clenched fists. When he came here, Xin Yuan Jie had already been killed by Qin Hao. It was time for him to take revenge. Retreat. Among the Xin Yuan family's team, a young man with a high status said. He could also tell that if they were to fight with Qin Hao, the team would definitely suffer a great loss. Not many of the remaining 400 people would be able to survive. Qin Hao was surrounded by powerful warriors, so it was not wise to fight with him. Alas, Xin Yuan Pingji sighed and glared at the people around Qin Hao before returning to his original position. Brother Qianyang, do you want to join us? Just as he was about to leave the statue area, Chang Lo suddenly saw that Yu Qianyang had also arrived. All right, Yu Qianyang's gloomy eyes flickered. He first looked at Qin Hao, then at Shou Wuk. He knew that he would not make a move again. Since the Wuxword sect was on Qin Hao's side, the Blazing Sun Temple might as well join forces with Chang Lo. Firstly, both sides had a common enemy, and secondly, they could protect themselves. Chang Lo nodded with satisfaction. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something. He turned to Lei Jiao and the others and asked, "Everyone, are you willing to cultivate with us?" Lei Jiao and the others also had an extraordinary aura. If they were to help, they would definitely have the upper hand. At that time, it would not be a problem to fight to the death with Qin Hao. No, Lei Jiao rejected coldly. He was only after the inheritance of the great emperor. He had no personal grudges with Qin Hao and did not want to be involved in the dispute. He had been used as a spear once on the peak, and he did not want to be used again. What about you? Chang Lo looked at Feng Qianli and Fairy Qianning. No one responded, but the two martial artists from the Ghost Wilderness stepped firmly into the Xianyuan family's team. The relics here are great. It is good to communicate with each other and take care of each other. If you have any problems, I will be waiting for you at any time. Chang Lo smiled and cupped his hands as he led everyone out of the area. Of course, they would not leave the relics. The relics were very big. Other than here, there were many statues elsewhere that could be used to comprehend the essence of martial arts. Killing Qin Hao was not a matter of loyalty. Xianyuan Jie was the example of the consequences of blindly attacking. Now, they needed to accumulate strength and strengthen themselves. Are we just going to let them go like this? Xiaoguo was not reconciled and did not understand. Killing Chang Lo is my personal matter. I'm grateful that the Sword Sect, Arhut Palace, and all of you came to help. But that is that. I cannot destroy your future because of my selfishness. Qin Hao also wanted to fight. If they fought, there would be casualties. The number of people in the Xianyuan family had decreased sharply, but there were still more than 400 people. Qin Hao could see that more than 100 people had comprehended the power of the statues. Once the battle began, how many of the disciples of the Sword Sect and Arhut Palace could survive? Unless they were as strong as Shou Wuk, otherwise they would be buried with them. After all, the disciples of the Sword Sect and Arhut Palace were not on the same side. They came to help out of morality. If they were asked to sacrifice themselves for Qin Hao, few would be willing. They stepped on the Divine Road, crossed the inland sea, and walked all the way to Di Luo Bay. They wanted to become disciples of the Divine Palace, not to kill Chang Lo for Qin Hao. What's more, Lei Jiao, Feng Qianli, and others were watching from the side. If the two sides had not been calm and fought just now, they would have been happy to see the result. No matter who died, it would not hinder their opportunity to compete for the position of Divine Palace disciple. On the contrary, it would make them have fewer competitors. At this time, many disciples of the Sword Sect and Arhut Palace were a little embarrassed. Chang Lo had brought people here, and the two sides were confronting each other. In fact, they were very nervous and afraid of a fierce battle. As Qin Hao expected, these people only wanted to become disciples of the Divine Palace, not to sacrifice themselves for others. Brother Qin Hao, please excuse us, Shou Wuk said. From a personal standpoint, he was very willing to help, but he was not alone. He was the senior brother of the outer sect of the Sword Sect, so he had to consider the feelings of his fellow disciples. Luo Yuliang was the same. You and I don't have to be strangers. Qin Hao smiled and did not have any grudges because of this. Next, everyone sat down and released their spirit to communicate with the statues and feel the essence of various martial arts. Each statue was good at different fields. No matter which warrior came here, they would be able to find a suitable cultivation direction for themselves. For example, Showuk chose a statue holding a sword and sat down. Qin Yun sat in front of a statue, holding a halberd, and closed his eyes to meditate. The scene was much quieter in an instant. During this period, many warriors from the outside world stepped into the ruins one after another. The huge ruins spread like wildfire. More and more people joined the cultivation team, forming a spectacular cultivation scene. In this ruin, warriors could use the power of the statues to regain their vitality and absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Therefore, the hunger that tormented people in the outside world was almost non-existent here. The remaining time given by the Divine Palace was only 3 months. 2 months had passed, and they were about to face the official assessment, which was the cruelest assessment. Only 1,000 people would be selected, and the rest would be left to fend for themselves. Ning Tianxing and Mo Xian went up the mountain to look for Qingji Han because they could not wait for her. Later, they learned about the entrance to the ruins from others and followed the iron chain all the way to here. After Qin Hao saw Ning Tianxing, neither of them said anything. Ning Tianxing met up with Qingji Han immediately. Seeing this scene, Qin Hao understood everything. No wonder Ning Tianxing did not appear when he first came to Ningwu. It seemed that he had established a relationship with the East Continent in advance and deliberately alienated himself. He understood in his heart, but Qin Hao did not point it out. Perhaps there had never been a friendship between the two of them. The so-called friendship was just a monetary relationship at the auction. Ning Tianxing had led troops to help in the Battle of Feng City and had repaid the debt owed by Ning Chaofan. Time flew by unknowingly. Another half a month had passed, and the final assessment was imminent. Now, Qin Hao, Zhou Wudao, Shou Wuk, and the others had long been accustomed to the pressure of the lower Renhuang area. After comprehending many wonderful methods, they pushed forward a little more and came to the center of the middle and upper level Renhuang area. After passing through this area, they would know whether there were imperial statues at the end of the ruins. Qin Hao, do you feel the difference? The upper level Renhuang area in front of us doesn't seem to be divided into different schools of martial arts anymore. Instead, the power is in chaos, forming a single suppression of telekinesis. It's the purest form of suppression. Not only does it suppress the physical body, but it also suppresses the mind and will. The more you resist, the stronger the suppression. First Wuk's expression was grave as he looked up at Qin Hao. Qin Hao nodded. Your feeling is correct. There is no sword, knife, or spear. There is also no fire, ice, or other elemental power. There is only the purest suppression of telekinesis. It will act directly on your mind. The spiritual power will suppress your physical body and crush your will. However, as long as you can endure and overcome this power, you will have a chance to turn the pressure into nutrition and become the driving force for a breakthrough. After listening to Qin Hao, everyone looked forward. On both sides of the road, there were incomparably tall statues. They were much taller than all the statues they had seen before. They were at least 300 to 400 feet tall. From these gigantic statues, there was an invisible and boundless pressure that made people feel like they were being crushed. The power was extremely heavy. It seems that everything before was child's play. Only by reaching this point can we have a chance to obtain a great opportunity, said Qin Yun. Qin Hao, you have to work hard. If there is really a statue of the emperor at the end, the only person who can obtain the emperor's will is you. Yining Chong said a very serious sentence. It sounded like encouragement, but it made many people feel uncomfortable. Everyone present was a genius. Why was it that the only person who could obtain the emperor's will was Qin Hao? At the very least, the disciples of the Sword Palace believed that the person who could obtain the emperor's will was their eldest senior brother, Shou Wuk. Lei Jiao and the others also thought so. Ahem, I will try my best. Qin Hao smiled bitterly. His sister had high expectations of him. The slaying clan does not serve an incompetent master. Zhang Ye's voice was cold. He actually had many prejudices in his heart. He had buried these dissatisfied thoughts for too long. He had questioned his elders since he was young. Why did they have to live for a certain person when they were born? Even the ancestral teachings stated that they could sacrifice their lives for that person. From Zhang Ye's point of view, even if Qin Hao was the reincarnation of that great emperor, he might not be stronger than him. Zhang Yi, watch your attitude, reprimanded Yuning Chang. As the descendant of the 4 great divine generals, she would not allow Zhang Yi to be so disrespectful. I believe that I'm not wrong. If he is not capable, I will leave with my people after the Divine Palace assessment. I will not let my brothers and sisters follow an incompetent person. That will only cause them to die. Zhang Ye's tone was firm. He did not leave any face. He looked provocatively at Qin Hao. If you want to obtain the respect of the Slaying Clan, use your actions to prove yourself. Prove that your ability is stronger than mine. Education 123 Literature Network. Chapter 1386. Translator. Nioibo Studio Editor. Nioibo, Studio the Emperor's Peak Zhang Yi, the descendant of Zhang Lang, the young master of Zhang sect. In the past, Dende had 4 generals. Zhang Lang specialized in attacking and had learned all of Qin Hao's battle techniques. He was the most powerful of the 4. Since Zhang Yi was the descendant of Zhang Lang, there was no doubt about his talent. But now, this junior had shouted at Dende and claimed that he would compete with Qin Hao. If he won, he would not serve Qin Hao as his master and would leave with his sect. His words were extremely disrespectful. Yining Chang's expression was cold. She had come to the southern region to find the descendant of the Zhang clan. After all these years, she knew that Zhang Yi was very capable. Of course, he was also very arrogant. But no matter what, he should not have provoked Qin Hao verbally. This was disgraceful. Qi Xiaohua and the others couldn't help but feel angry. Even though Yuning Shang didn't explain Zhang Ye's identity to them, they could tell that these sabersmen were good friends, not enemies. But Zhang Ye's words provoked Qin Hao and questioned the ability of the leader of the Grand Alliance. This was unacceptable. In the hearts of Xiaohua and Yi Shuihan, in terms of talent, no one could compare to their boss. Qin Hao looked at Zhang Yi indifferently. He smelled a trace of Zhang Lang's temper from him. It seemed that he was also someone who needed to be taught a lesson. Standing up silently, Qin Hao ignored him and stepped forward toward the upper-level emperor area. If he won, he would lose face, but if he lost, he could not afford to lose face. Qin Hao preferred to use actions to prove himself. Talent? Sure. He just did not know if Zhang Yi would be so ashamed when Dende showed off his talent, and how he would face those disrespectful words. I liked you before, but now you give me a terrible impression. Xiaohua snorted coldly and chased after him. Compete with him in terms of talent? Kid, even I have to admit your courage. Of course, it's just that your courage is commendable. Zhou Wudao smiled. He was used to being suppressed by Qin Hao. Occasionally, seeing Qin Hao suppress others seemed to be a different kind of fun. Brother who plays with swords, I've never seen a man cry in my life. I hope you can control yourself later. Shouwuk looked at Zhang Yi sympathetically and stood up to leave. During the debate in Golden Light City, Qin Hao's Pill Dao, sword arts, body refinement, flame control, and even concept engraving were all exquisite and profound, causing people to exclaim in admiration. He had single-handedly defeated the combined forces of the 3 geniuses. Chang Lo had no way of defending himself. The onlooker's blood was boiling. At first, no one believed him when he claimed to be able to suppress a generation in the southern region. Many of the famous martial emperors in the southern region laughed it off. However, the final result left everyone speechless and ashamed. In front of Qin Hao, there was really no one in the southern region. At that time, Shouwuk was shocked and nodded in agreement. In his opinion, Qin Hao is fully worthy of the title of suppressing a generation in the southern region. After all, even Shouwuk couldn't gather so many unique skills and use them to his heart's content like Qin Hao. The funny thing was that today, someone actually stood up and questioned Qin Hao's ability. Was he going to put his face on the table and let others beat him? Humph! Yi Shuihan only snorted. Boss went to challenge the upper emperor area. It was meaningless for them to stay here. At most, they could comprehend some wonderful skills. It was better to be straightforward and accompany Qin how to sweep the statues and conquer the last one. For a time, everyone left, including Zhang Yi. Since they had issued the challenge, they couldn't back down. No matter who won or lost, there had to be a result. Let's go. Lei Jiao followed with the two from the Hall of Judgment. After estimating the time, the Divine Palace assessment was coming. It was time to go to the end of the ruins. Moreover, if there really was an imperial statue, then not only Qin Hao and Zhang Yi, but at least Lei Jiao wouldn't give it up. He would fight for it. As soon as Lei Chuan and the others left, the three women of the Shuiyao Holy Kingdom and the people of the Zhuiying Sword Palace immediately followed. Obtaining the imperial will meant obtaining the inheritance. Why did they want to participate in the Divine Palace? Why did they want to kill Qin Hao at Yinming Mountain? Wasn't it to cultivate to become a 9-star great emperor? If there was an opportunity, they couldn't miss it. Suddenly, Qin Hao walked alone, and all the cultivators behind him followed. Those with outstanding talents all wanted to see what was at the end of the relic. However, there was still a large number of cultivators who were stuck below the Middle Emperor area. They could only watch the departing group and sigh unwillingly. After all, there were only a few people as strong as Lei Jiao. Most warriors, even if they wanted to compete, didn't have the ability. As they moved forward, there was an incomparably bright light ahead. The closer they got, the heavier the pressure became. Just as Showuk said, there were no longer sword, fire, or ice attributes in front of them. It was as if everything had returned to chaos. There was only the purest suppression of telekinesis. The more intense the resistance, the stronger the pressure. But if they didn't increase their strength, they couldn't take a single step forward. It was as if a dead knot had formed. Withstanding the enormous pressure, the geniuses of the highest level among the tens of thousands of participants finally arrived at the Upper Emperor area. They seemed to have walked a long way. There were no longer any statues along the way. Not a single one. The sides of the road were empty, and in front of them, 10 statues stood. They weren't tall, only 3 or 4 meters tall. There was a sharp contrast with the huge statues from before that were hundreds of feet tall. Strangely, the geniuses felt an incomparable pressure from these 10 statues. Every time their feet landed, it was as if their whole legs were going to sink into the ground, as if they were carrying a heavy mountain. What a strong telekinesis suppression. Showuk raised his head and gritted his teeth. Sweat dripped down his cheeks. Everyone around was the same. At this time, there weren't many warriors who had reached this place. The weakest were Lei Jiao's fellow disciples. The 5 warriors of the Zheng clan, along with Yi Yao's junior sister, were all stuck halfway. They couldn't move an inch. The crowd stared at the statues in front of them. These 10 statues were all emitting an incomparably powerful pressure. Their nobility and majesty made it difficult for the crowd to look straight at them. It was as though each and every one of them was an emperor among humans, an existence that was second only to emperors. Everyone knew very well that the seniors who had left behind these 10 statues must have reached the powerful half-step Yuan emperor level. They were like Duanmu Qingwei, who had comprehended the will of the emperor and was only 1 step away from becoming an emperor. And the strongest cultivator present was only at the 3rd level of the emperor realm, which was Zhou Wudao's realm. Zhou Wudao had advanced a level in the half a month since entering the ruins. But facing the 10 human emperor statues, when all 10 of them released their telekinesis suppression at the same time, one could imagine how terrifying the power was to everyone. Qin Hao stood quietly, seemingly unaffected by the pressure. His gaze followed the center of the path and looked to the end. There was an incomparably bright light shining at the end. Even with the red lotus fire eyes, it was difficult to see what it was. But one thing was very clear. There was an extremely powerful will of the emperor at the end of the light. This will was far stronger than Li Wanji and Yining Hong. It was about the same as Ning Songsong's, which meant that it had entered the 2nd level of the emperor realm. Not simple indeed, Qin Hao said. In his position, entering the 2nd level of the emperor realm was nothing. After all, Qin Hao had entered the 3rd level and touched the threshold of the 4th level in his previous life. But thinking about it from another perspective, how many of Zhou Wudao's group had seen the power of the second level of the Emperor Realm. That power was undoubtedly destructive to everyone. I thought I was one step ahead. I didn't expect you all to be here as well. A familiar voice rang out. Then, Changhe Lo stepped into the field. There were only a few members of the Xianyuan clan behind him. Among them were Xianyuan Pingji and Xianyuan Di, as well as 2 ghost wilderness cultivators. However, there were only 7 people in total. It was difficult to compare with Qin Hao's group. At this moment, Changhe Lo and the others were very cautious and put some distance between themselves and Qin Hao. After all, they no longer had the advantage in numbers. If Qin Hao suddenly attacked, it would be very dangerous. However, Changhe Lo wasn't the only one here. Qingji Han, Ning Tianxing, Mo Xian, and the 3 demon generals also stood in the crowd. At this moment, it could be said that all the top geniuses of the continent had gathered here. Anyone who was qualified to face the pressure of the 10 Renhuang statues was a monstrous existence. Qin Hao glanced at Mo Xian and saw the intense hatred in the 3 demon generals' eyes. He withdrew his gaze and didn't respond to Changhe Lo's words. Of course, he also knew that it was not convenient to attack at this time. Feeling that Qin Hao had restrained his killing intent, Changhe Lo couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Immediately, the corners of his mouth rose again. He said, "These ruins are mysterious and unpredictable. I thought that after entering, there would be a level suppression. Lower Renhuang couldn't enter the middle Renhuang statue area. I didn't expect that as long as one's faith is strong enough and one's talent is strong enough, with the help of the statue's telekinesis, one can break through one's own limits and comprehend the essence of martial arts at a higher level." Everyone had a deep understanding of these words. At first, Qin Hao also thought that the venerables couldn't pass through the Renhuang statue area. However, reality proved that as long as one's talent was high enough, there was no level barrier. This world of statues was very tolerant and selfless. Warriors could even use the telekinesis of the lower Renhuang statues to challenge the middle Renhuang statues. It was as if they existed only to teach the younger generation. Now, do you want to see what's at the end of the ruins? Changhe Lo smiled and glanced at the crowd. If no one paid attention to him, it was tantamount to fart. "I'll go first." Xianyuan Pingji couldn't wait any longer. He stepped forward and was the first to step on the path of the 10 Renhuang statues. Perhaps no one knew what was at the end of the ruins. However, it was obvious that there was only one benefit at the end. Naturally, he had to make the first move. Xianyuan Pingji's talent was not outstanding among the crowd. It wasn't easy for him to get here. He had to seize the opportunity. Even if he knew that the pressure ahead was great, he had to try. Otherwise, if Qin Hao, Lei Jiao, and the others attacked, he would have no chance. Wang, stepping forward, Xianyuan Pingji stepped on the middle of the path of the Renhuang statues. Suddenly, the scene changed. The path was filled with endless light, as if Xianyuan Pingji had stepped into a terrifying yuan qi. In an instant, an indescribable pressure enveloped him. One could see with the naked eye that Xianyuan Pingji's body was distorted on the dazzling path. A painful groan came from his throat. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Xianyuan Pingji was careful and cautious. Every step he took seemed to be using all his strength. When he took the 3rd step, suddenly, a beam of light fell from the Renhuang statue at the front of the path. It shone on Xianyuan Pingji's body. In an instant, he trembled as if he had been electrocuted. Following a hoarse roar, a faint yellow halo was emitted from his body. He had activated his gravity source spirit to resist the pressure of the first Renhuang statue. However, Xianyuan Pingji had underestimated the power of the Emperor Realm. This power was very terrifying. In a single exchange, the faint yellow halo around his body was destroyed. His aura was extinguished. As if he had been struck by lightning, with a pong, he was sent flying and landed heavily on the ground. Hiss! Lei Jiao and the others sucked in a breath of cold air. 3 steps, Xianyuan Pingji said in disbelief. as if he had suffered the greatest setback in his life. His face was filled with humiliation and shame. Although his talent couldn't compare to Lei Jiao and Feng Qianli, he was still a first-rate genius of a Xianyuan family. When Xianyuan Jie and Xianyuan Feng were still alive, it was difficult for him to stand out. But now he could be considered the most outstanding person in the Xianyuan family. However, he couldn't even take 3 steps in front of the Renhuang statue. How great was this blow? As Xianyuan Pingji was sent flying, Xianyuan Di and the others immediately retracted their impulse to try. After all, they weren't much stronger than Xianyuan Pingji. At the same time, many of the geniuses present had ugly expressions. They naturally understood that Xianyuan Pingji had revealed his cultivation of the Emperor realm. He had a Yuan spirit, but he couldn't even take 3 steps. With this as a reference, how many geniuses present could take 3 steps? What about after 3 steps? The path of light in front of them looked incomparably far, so far that it made them feel powerless. Education 123 Literature Network. Chapter 1387. Qianqian Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Imperial Road. To Qi, the 10 statues were like 10 top Renhuangs blocking the way, cutting off the fateful encounters in front of them. This made everyone gulp. Let me try. At this time, Qin Hao saw Si San step forward and walk to the center of the road. In an instant, the road lit up with dazzling white light again, as if endless pressure was descending. Si San stomped on the ground, clenched his fists, and roared. Above his body, the shadow of a mountain ape appeared. It was huge and wrapped around him. Warriors could summon their primordial spirits by borrowing the power of the statues. Si San was an ape in human form, so his life spirit was naturally an ape. When his life spirit appeared, a strong power surged in his body. Not only did his physical body become stronger, but his will also seemed to become more tenacious. He forced his way forward until a ray of dazzling light shone down from the first Renhuang statue. Suddenly, everyone held their breath. Previously, Xianyuan Pingji had been defeated by the might of Renhuang. Now, no one knew if Si San could withstand it. At this moment, Qin Hao felt that the light released by the Renhuang statue was extremely mysterious. It was like the brute force of a warrior. It was very pure, as if it was deliberately targeting Si San. After all, Si San was good at pure brute force. Qin Hao subconsciously opened his red lotus fiery pupil and looked more carefully. He suddenly realized that the suppressing power of the Renhuang statue was of the same attribute as Hai Sha's. It was as if 2 powerful physical warriors were fighting against each other. This power kept hitting Hai Sha's body. He wondered what kind of terrible test Hai Sha was facing at this moment. Dong. However, this 4th step was eventually taken firmly by him, and he succeeded in taking the Si San step. Then he took the 5th step, the 6th step, and the 7th step. Each step was more determined than the last, and each step was more shocking than the last. He actually managed to take 10 steps in a row despite the might of Renhuang, and he was far ahead of everyone else. Until the 2nd ray of light shone on Si San's body, he stopped moving forward. Roar! Si Sarfan roared as incomparably intense soul force gushed out from his fingers. The terrifying power seemed capable of piercing through the heavens. He punched out towards the 2nd beam of light. The fist light and the beam of light intertwined, resembling 2 armies clashing against each other. Finally, with a loud bang, the fist light was shattered, and the beam of light was also destroyed. Si San let out a muffled groan as blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. However, his body was still standing straight. Apparently, he had successfully withstood the pressure of the 2 Renhuang statues. However, his body had also suffered heavy losses. After this punch, Si San, who had taken 10 steps forward, did not continue forward. He sat down cross-legged, as if he had gained some enlightenment. He began to close his eyes and adjust his breathing. The aura on his body became thicker and thicker, as if he was about to break through. So strong. As everyone watched the entire process, they couldn't help but feel their hearts tremble. Previously, it was rumored that sea sand's cultivation was astonishing. Now that they saw it, it was indeed extraordinary. It was no wonder that he dared to kill the leaders of the 5 gangs alone. At the foot of Cloud Mist Mountain, Xianyuan Liang, Xianyuan Gu, and Xianyuan Di could not touch him even if they joined forces. From the performance just now, it was clear that Xianyuan Di and Xianyuan Pingji were not at the same level as Sea Sand at all. Perhaps when they were at the foot of the mountain, Sea Sand had not shown his true ability. Even so, he had taken the names of the 2 geniuses of the Xianyuan clan, as expected of an expert who had fought 10 rounds with the boss. Brother Hai is also a ruthless person. Sayogwa praised, taking this person as a role model. Unfortunately, someone as strong as Sea Sand had only taken 10 steps and withstood the pressure of 2 Renhuang statues. Other than that, there were still 8 Renhuang statues that had not made a move yet. If 10 Renhuang statues released their pressure at the same time, the scene would be terrifying just thinking about it. No matter what, if Sea Sand could take 10 steps in a row, Qin Hao would naturally not have a problem. In fact, he would be able to take even further steps. Sayogwa knew in his heart that Sea Sand had been defeated by Qin Hao. Very strong indeed. Not only is Sea Sand strong, but this path of Renhuang is even stronger. The more powerful it is, the more thrilling it is to conquer. And I guarantee that I will go further than Sea Sand. Can you keep up with my pace? Qin Hao took a deep breath and adjusted himself to his best state. His eyes were full of fighting spirit as he looked at Qin Hao. Qin Hao still ignored him. The pressure of Renhuang? Stronger than the will of the Emperor? Perhaps this path was not a challenge for Qin Hao at all. Chang'e Lo looked over curiously. There seemed to be a problem in Qin Hao's camp. Someone was not willing to accept him. Thinking of this, Chang'e Lo felt a sense of satisfaction in his heart. He said coldly, "Pavilion Master Qin, I was defeated by you in Golden Light City. To be honest, I am not convinced. Today, we can compete again to see who can go further on the path of Renhuang until the end. Haven't you lost enough face in the arena? Are you looking for humiliation again?" Qin Hao replied coldly. Zhanya's provocation could be ignored, but who was Chang'e Lo? He had lost 3 battles in Golden Light City and fled in panic after a fierce battle in Feng City. Today, he still had the guts to compete with Qin Hao. Count me in. Yu Qianyang's body was burning hot. His upside-down hair swayed as if bathed in flames. At the same time, the murderous intent in the eyes of the 2 warriors of the Ghost Wilderness was undisguised. Several gazes were focused on Qin Hao. Buzz. Shouwuk's body resonated with the sound of a sword. His sharp eyes looked straight at Yu Qianyang. Zhou Wudao took a step forward. His arrogant aura enveloped the 2 warriors of the Ghost Wilderness. Sword Will, I will be your opponent. Feng Qinli of Juying Sword Palace felt that Shouwuk's sword was extremely pure, and his fighting spirit was immediately ignited. Zhou Wudao, it's time for us to settle this. Let's use the might of Renhuang to prove who is stronger. Mo Xian walked out and stood in front of Zhou Wudao. In the East Continent, the 2 of them had special identities and had scruples about each other. No matter how they fought, they did not dare to use their full strength. If one of them died, it would inevitably lead to a war between the empires. Today was different. They did not need to fight to the death. Stepping on this path of Renhuang and resisting the might of Renhuang was enough to judge their strength. My pleasure. Zhou Wudao was not afraid. Suddenly, the scene became lively. The geniuses of the empires present all had a strong fighting spirit. They wanted to show their superiority in front of their peers. This way, they could prove that others were inferior to them. Lei Jiao and the other 2 looked at Luo Yuliang and Sayogwa across the air. Yi Yao and Xiao Jiao stared coldly at the 2 warriors of the Ghost Wilderness. The sword will on Shouwuk and Feng Qinli became more and more intense. It was as if 2 sharp swords were about to take shape and soar into the sky. When Yishuehan was surrounded by water vapor, he attracted the intense attention of the three women of the Shueiyao Holy Kingdom. Ning Tianqing silently looked at Qingji Han's back. It seemed that in his eyes, the other geniuses were nothing, including Qin Hao. Perhaps today, on this path of Renhuang, he could capture the heart of the first princess of the East Continent. He wanted to prove that he, Crown Prince Ning Wu, was the real number one. However, Qingji Han's eyes fell on Qin Hao. At the same time, Xiao Han, who had just recovered his spiritual consciousness, noticed that a woman was looking at him. A sharp light rose in his eyes. "Let's go." Zhang Yi decisively stepped to the center of the path. Life was born, and one's fate should be controlled by oneself. How could one live for others? Breaking the old rules, Qin Hao should be trampled underfoot. If he defeated Dinda's reincarnation, Zhang Yi would be independent and would have nothing to do with Qin Hao. Buzz, 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 buzz. For a time, the geniuses stepped onto the path of Renhuang. The light on the path suddenly flashed extremely fiercely. When they really stepped onto the path, they finally felt how strong the Renhuang's extremity was. However, many of them were from imperial families or had emperors in their sect. In the past, they had faced the suppression of the emperor's will from their elders. Therefore, at this moment, the might of the Renhuang was not as irresistible to them as they had imagined. On the contrary, many people seemed to be very accustomed to this pressure. For example, Haisha's ability was extraordinary. According to him, his family was born on an overseas ape island. The strongest of their ancestors was a golden ape emperor who ruled 100,000 islands. This was the reason why he took the 10 steps in a row. After all, when he was in his family, he had faced the aura of his elders and felt the emperor's will. However, Xinyuan Pingji was different. Although he was from a prestigious family and was a descendant of the Xinyuan royal family, his status could not be compared to Xinyuan Jie and Xinyuan Feng. His family had no emperors. Only the direct family members had emperors. This was also the reason why Xinyuan Jie's ancestors dominated the south. If Xinyuan Pingji's family was stronger, they would not be as high as Xinyuan Gaoyan. However, when the geniuses stepped onto the path of Renhuang, the might of the Renhuang statues descended. The first statue released an even greater light that covered everyone's heads. The light was intense and almost encompassed all forms of martial arts. There was an incomparably sharp sword light that fell on Shou Wuk and Feng Qianli. There was an overbearing blade light that slashed toward Zhang Yi. There was also a terrifying force that crazily swallowed Yi Shuehan and the three women of the Shueiyao Holy Kingdom. In short, whatever the challengers were good at, the Renhuang statues could give them a taste of their own medicine. Moreover, the counterattack power was even purer. This path of Renhuang was really mysterious. Qin Hao followed behind the crowd and also stepped forward. However, he did not use any elemental power. He completely let go of himself, as if he was taking a stroll in the bamboo grove. At this time, the Renhuang light shone above his head. The Renhuang will naturally also suppress Qin Hao. However, because he did not use any elemental power, he did not face the same situation as the others who were attacked by blades. However, there was a wisp of pure Renhuang will that invaded Qin Hao's mind. It was as if there was an emperor standing in front of Qin Hao, ordering him to kneel down and submit. This invisible force pierced into the mind. If it were another person, they would be terrified. However, to Qin Hao, it was still too weak. Not to mention the Renhuang's might. Even if it was the emperor's might, so what? Qin Hao ignored the Renhuang's might in his mind. He even imagined himself spitting at the Renhuang with his hands behind his back. He walked leisurely as if he was on a scenic tour. Dong! In front of him, Zhang Yi took 10 steps forward. He was like the sand in the ocean, unstoppable. After 10 steps, the second strand of might from the emperor's statue transformed into a saber light that slashed toward Zhang Yi. A terrifying saber will abruptly erupted from Zhang Yi's body, forcefully shattering the saber light descending upon him. I hope you won't disappoint me too much. Looking back at Qin Hao, who was at the end of the group, Zhang Yi continued forward. He did not even look at Hai Sha, who was meditating and directly passed by him. Perhaps in his heart, someone as strong as Hai Sha was not worthy of being his opponent. Chapter 1388. Translator. Nioibo Studio Editor. Nioibo Studio, go back and rest. On the road to the Renhuang Plain, geniuses competed. The statues released the power of the Great Path, and the pure power of the mind evolved into various forms of martial arts. For a time, the path was filled with sword chi. Blade aura flashed wildly, storms raged, and ice spread. Zhang Yi took 10 steps and crossed the sand. He turned back to remind Qin Hao not to disappoint him. In Zhang Yi's opinion, Dindi had fallen, and Qin Hao was just a reincarnation. Perhaps some of the martial arts of his previous life were left in the depths of his soul. Those were Qin Hao's wealth and could be considered an innate advantage. However, a warrior's hard work was more important. In terms of cultivation, Zhang Yi did not think that he would lose to anyone. Unfortunately, this was only his wishful thinking. Little did he know that Qin Hao was not a reincarnation, but a reincarnation in another body. Dindi had only lost his physical body. His sovereign spirit was still at the level of a 9-star great emperor. He had not forgotten any of his abilities. His cultivation was even faster. It seemed that the outcome of the competition was destined from the beginning. But in Qin Hao's heart, he had never thought of competing with Zhang Yi. In his opinion, Zhang Yi was just a junior who needed to be taught a lesson. After Zhang Yi finished speaking, he took a few more steps. An even more violent blade will appeared around him, leaving everyone behind. His attitude was arrogant and uncontrollable. Qin Hao did not care. Not only did he ignore Zhang Yi, but he also ignored the majesty of the Renhuang that invaded his mind. He followed at the end of the team, walking very calmly. At this time, he was thinking about how the statues could transform the mind power into various forms of martial arts and suppress them on the warriors. This kind of method was very profound. Even he could not understand it. The South Pole Divine Palace is worthy of its reputation. When I become a disciple of the Divine Palace, there should be many things worth learning. Qin Hao smiled. After entering the Divine Palace, he would have to ask the Divine Palace emperors for guidance on the mind power. At this time, in the Upper Imperial Statue District, many warriors stopped here. They watched as the group of peerless geniuses stepped forward, gradually moving further and further away in pursuit of the highest realm of martial arts. But they could not move forward. Their hearts were filled with endless sorrow. Perhaps this was the difference between people. However, some cultivators refused to accept their fates. They were eager to join the challenge team, trying to stand shoulder to shoulder with the prodigies in front of them. However, the outcome was cruel. Warriors rushed in batch after batch, but they were sent flying back one after another. Most of them could not withstand the might of the first Renhuang, including Xianyuan Pingji. He did not give up and challenged it 5 times in a row. Each time, it was the same as before. It was as if those 3 steps would forever be an insurmountable thunder pool, a shame that was branded on him. Everyone saw that Zhang Yi, who was walking the fastest, was currently shouldering 4 beams of Renhuang's might. He had taken more than 20 steps and was about to welcome the arrival of the 5th beam of light. Behind him, Ning Tianxing, Lei Jiao, Qingji Han, Zhou Wudao, and Mo Xian formed the 2nd echelon. They were also resisting the might of 4 Renhuang and were only 3 steps away from Zhang Yi. The 3rd echelon consisted of Shou Wuk, Feng Qianli, Fairy Qianning, Yi Shui Han, and Chang Hello. Qin Hao, Xiao Han, and K were at the very end of the group. However, Zhang Yi, who was far in the lead, suddenly stopped. He turned around and looked at the end of the group. He is waiting for Qin Hao. Chang Hello also stopped and looked back. A strange smile appeared on his face. "You are too slow," Zhang Yi shouted at Qin Hao. "This is your ability. You will always be at the very end." Qin Hao looked up. He was previously the Imperial Lord, and Zhang Yi was the descendant of a general. Now, They were both walking on the Imperial Road, bearing the might of Renhuang. Instead, the Imperial Lord was at the very end, and Zhang Yi was the leader. This was not a good situation. Looking away, Qin Hao held Xiao Han's hand. Faintly, the might of the Imperial Lord spread out around him. He said softly, "Let's go." He no longer tried to figure out the statue's telekinesis. There was no trace of reluctance. If a tiger did not show its might, it would be crushed. Qin Hao stepped forward. Without waiting for the people in front to react, he had already stepped forward with Xiao Han and care. The might that descended from above was like nothing. They did not stop. They quickly passed a fairy from the Water Jade Kingdom and a junior from Lei Jiao. They stepped into the third echelon and were no longer at the very end. Seeing this, Zhang Yi turned around and continued forward. He could naturally see that Qin Hao was deliberately at the very end. In reality, he could not be that weak. The whole group was moving forward. Unknowingly, everyone had taken more than 20 steps and withstood the might of the four Renhuang. During this time, the woman from the Water Jade Kingdom and a junior from Lei Jiao, who had been left behind by Qin Hao, had reached their limits. They were sweating profusely, as if they were in a quagmire. They could not move forward any further and stopped under the might of the four Renhuang statues. Qin Hao followed the third echelon and welcomed the suppression of the fifth Renhuang statue. At the moment when the fifth ray of light descended, everyone trembled at the same time. It was as if another heavy mountain had been added to their bodies. The attacks of the statue's telekinesis also became more and more fierce. Bang! A loud noise was heard. Suddenly, two warriors from the Ghost Wilderness were the first to be unable to bear it. They were sent flying back and smashed into the starting point of the path. After landing, they spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time. Their faces were pale. I thought they were more powerful. Little Nine looked back. He regarded the warriors from the Ghost Wilderness as his opponents. However, those two could not withstand the might of the fifth Renhuang and were sent back to the starting point. Their opponents were too weak. It was disappointing. After the two heard this, they were so angry that they spat out another mouthful of blood. Their fists were clenched so tightly that they trembled. However, they had indeed reached their limits and could not continue forward. Compared to the many figures in front of them, they only realized at this moment that they were so weak. Chang Helou's expression was not good either. Therefore, it was already strenuous for him to withstand the might of the fifth Renhuang. Gradually, the strength of his walking became weaker and weaker. It seemed that he was about to reach his personal limit. How could he bear this? Moreover, the two warriors from the Ghost Wilderness were sent flying back. According to the camp, they were his companions. This undoubtedly increased the psychological pressure on him, causing the strength of his legs to weaken more and more. Don't force yourself if you're tired. Why don't you go back and rest? A voice that he did not want to hear came to his ears. Chang Helou looked up and saw Qin Hao's figure walking past him. Creak! Chang Helou clenched his fists and blue veins appeared on his neck. Previously, he had threatened to compete with Qin Hao again. Now, he was about to reach his limit. On the other hand, Qin Hao, who was at the end of the group, had unknowingly surpassed him and was walking like the wind. I won't lose. I definitely won't. Chang Helou's expression was tense. The soul power around him surged. A ball of intense light bloomed, and the Guqin spirit appeared behind him. Suddenly, the sound of the zither rang out. Along with the activation of the soul power, the Guqin spirit played automatically. When the sound of the zither rang out, the pressure on Chang Helou was greatly reduced. The might of the great path that enveloped his head was resisted by the sound of the zither. He took another step forward and barely managed to keep up with the third echelon. However, at this time, he was at the end of the group. Buzz! The sound of the sword rang out. At the front of the third echelon, Shou Wuk and Feng Qinli simultaneously increased their powerful sword will. The sword will circled around their bodies and resisted the might above them. Beams of dazzling sword light fell, blocking the path of the two swordsmen. The sword will on their bodies seemed to have materialized. Beams of sharp light reflected back, entangling, colliding, and constantly shattering the falling sword light. Not only did their pace not slow down, but it also became faster. The two of them directly left the third echelon and stepped into the second echelon. Roar! Above Tsioga's body, a huge shadow of a green ox appeared. The shadow roared in the sky, filled with an endless sense of violence. Tsioga seemed to have turned into a wild beast. The soles of his feet stomped on the ground, and he actually chased after Sho Wuk and Feng Qianli. Everyone in the group, including the others, became more powerful as they released their primordial spirits. Seeing this scene, Chang Helo's expression became more and more unsightly. He felt that his Guqin spirit would not be able to hold on for long, especially when the Renhuang's telekinesis evolved. The sound of the zither pierced into his mind and disrupted his spirit. His will began to weaken, and he had an urge to sleep. The telekinesis was ever-changing. It was too difficult to move forward while enduring the might. The group of geniuses who were currently on the Emperor's road changed again. Zhang Yu was no longer in the lead. On his left and right, Mo Xian, Ning Tianxing, Qing Jihan, and Lei Jiao caught up and moved forward side by side. Zhou Wudao, Sho Wuk, and Feng Qianli chased closely. They were only one step away from the group in front, and the gap was not large. These people could be considered the first echelon. Now, they had crossed 35 steps and withstood the might of 7 Renhuang at the same time. Qin Yun, Aku, Chen Wanqin, Yu Qianyang, Yi Yao, and Xiao Jiu were in the second echelon. They advanced while withstanding the might of 6 Renhuang. Behind them was Qin Hao's group. In this group, there were Xiao Han, Ke Lei Jiao's other junior brother, 2 swordsmen from Juying Sword Palace, and warriors from the Celestial Cliffs. There was also Chang Helo. They had withstood the 5th Renhuang's might and were about to face the 6th. Chang Helo was not in good condition. He looked like he had aged decades. His back was hunched, and he breathed heavily. His face was as red as blood, as if all the blood in his body was being squeezed out by the pressure. His white clothes were gradually dyed red with blood and sweat. Looking at Ning Tianxing's group, who were far ahead, he felt that the distance between them was so great. He wanted to chase after them, but he did not have the strength to do so. Thinking back to this life, he had shown great talent when he was young. He had the power of the Guqin spirit. Among hundreds of thousands of Guqin players, he was known as the #1 in the Southern region. He had defeated almost all the disciples of the Southern Region Music Palace. At that time, he was so elegant that even the Grand Elder of the Music Palace was willing to accept him as a disciple. However, he smiled lightly and entered the Spiritual Beast sect. At that time, he was extremely arrogant and thought that he was better than Sho Wuk. In the Southern region, Sho Wuk's swordsmanship was on a different level. In the path of entertainment, Chang Helo should also enjoy the status of being admired by others, until he met Qin Hao at the Ning family's Wenhua Garden in Golden Light City. He wanted to take Ke as a slave. With his talent and ability, it would be an honor for Ke to follow him. In the end, he was humiliated and forced to sleep on the streets. In the arena debate, he wanted to wash away the shame of the Wenhua Garden. However, he lost all 3 battles. Even if he joined forces with Tang Xingchen and Xianyuan Feng, he still lost miserably. He was almost crushed by Qin Hao. That day was the darkest day of his life. It was the most humiliating day. After that battle, he was no longer the #1 in the music Dao in the Southern region. Instead, Qin Hao used him as a stepping stone and won the title of Conqueror of the Southern region. He hated Qin Hao, so he promised Xianyuan Wuying that the Spiritual Beast sect would join the battle in Feng City. But that day, he was still defeated by Qin Hao after he merged with his soul weapon. If the elders of the sect hadn't come to his rescue, he would have been a dead man. Today, the heavens gave him another chance to turn the tables. When he reached the end of the royal road, he could prove that his previous defeats and Qin Hao were all luck. As long as he reached the end of the royal road, he could remove the shadow of Qin Hao from his heart. In addition, Sho Wuk would also look at him with new eyes. But why was it that when so many people were ahead of him, he was at the end of the line, even though he tried his best? Compared to the other geniuses, his talent was really that bad. The heavens were unfair. I won't admit defeat. Never. Changha Lo raised his waist crazily, as if he wanted to fight against the heavens. Swoosh! The sixth beam of Renhuang light descended. Within the light, there was a Guqin sound of the great path. It was loud and clear. The sound of the Guqin destroyed his Guqin spirit. Changha Luoyang's waist seemed to have suffered a heavy blow. He was thrown back violently and landed at the starting point of the path. At this time, Qin Hao's words faintly rang in his ears. Go back and rest. Education 123 Literature Network. Chapter 1389. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The Might of the 10 Emperor's Puff. Spitting out blood, Changha Lo lay on the ground. His face was as pale as paper, and the veins on his forehead were throbbing violently. He looked at Qin Hao's back in front of him with endless hatred in his eyes. He lost again. Previously, he had declared in public that he had lost to Qin Hao. He was extremely dissatisfied and wanted to compete again to prove who was better. However, under the might of the Emperor, Qin Hao moved forward unimpeded. He was no match for the suppression of the Emperor's might and was blasted back to his original position. Dissatisfied? Genius. Comparable to Showuk. Not to mention Qin Hao. Even Xiaogua, Qin Yun, Yi Shuihan, and even Lei Jiao's junior brother had gone further than him. How could he have the face to say such arrogant words again and again? Despicable. Looked back and saw Changha Lo lying on the ground vomiting blood, revealing endless sadness and desolation. She felt happy and smiled. This person has been going against brother-in-law all the time. We didn't provoke him, so he deserves it. Qin Hao smiled indifferently. From a fair point of view, Changha Lo's talent is not bad. After all, he comes from a lower background. Even though he has an essence soul and entered the spirit beast sect to cultivate, his background can't be compared to Wuk, Lei Jiao, and the others. Not to mention that he has never experienced the tempering of the Emperor's might. Even the will of the Emperor is rarely beaten. The first time he walked on the path of the Emperor, he advanced while enduring 5 waves of Emperor's might until he was sent flying by the 6th wave. It's not bad. Qin Hao's evaluation was very pertinent. Showuk was born in the Sword Monarch family and had been in contact with the Sword Monarch since he was a child. Naturally, he would have a strong personal will to resist Emperor Yuan's might. This was born invisibly. Showuk was probably already used to the majesty of the Emperor's will. It was the same for Lei Jiao and the others. Changha Lo was different. Because he came from a lower background, he yearned for higher places and even envied those who came from a higher background. Therefore, he worked hard to climb up and recognized Xin Yuan Wuing as his father. It was nothing if that was all. It was normal for people to walk on the path of the word. His mistake was that he had encountered Qin Hao and been crushed several times. A shadow had been planted in his heart. That shadow had caused great damage to his Dao heart and hindered his personal progress. Changha Lo, because he was facing the Suppression Emperor's might, his sense of urgency was magnified. He wanted to win, and that was he. Because he's Renhuang, Emperor Yuan he Lo. Because he Emperor's translation. Otherwise, as long as he faced success and failure calmly, he should be able to go further. In fact, it was him who had cut off his own path of martial arts. Yining Shang nodded. Qin Hao's explanation was straightforward, and she enjoyed it a lot. Translation, Lin, translation. Rin translation, Lin is translation. Translation was Yi eyes. Once a demon formed in one's heart and one stubbornly dug into a dead end, one's cultivation path would naturally be obstructed. Remembering Qin Hao's words, Yining Shang smiled bitterly. In fact, besides psychological factors, a warrior's talent was more important. Right now, she felt that her steps were getting heavier and heavier. Her chest was stuffy and she was short of breath. She knew that she had reached her limit. You guys go. Yining Chang sat down shakily and closed her eyes. She stopped the Emperor's path when she was about to face the seventh human ruler. Sister Ingchong. Xiao Han was babbling incoherently. He turned around and anxiously tugged at the corner of Yuning Shang's clothes. Bearing the imperial might, he advanced. Every step he took was a form of improvement for him. It was a pity that Yuning Chang had to stop here. Don't disturb her. Sister Ingchong is about to break through. Qin Hao grabbed Xiao Han's hand and shook his head at her. Although there was a hint of regret in his eyes, he knew very well that Yuning Chang had tried her best. This outer sect elder of Qiyang University wasn't outstanding in terms of talent. After 6 years, she had already cultivated to the 8th level Yuan Venerate. Qin Hao could tell that she had worked very hard and suffered a lot. However, her talent was limited after all. Forcing her to reach the same height as Shou Wuck was obviously not something she could do. Yuning Chang also understood this point. Therefore, she faced it calmly and wasn't discouraged. Compared to Chang Lo, Yuning Chang was more open-minded. Therefore, she had obtained the opportunity to break through. Although she had stopped here, she had still gained something. On the other hand, Changha Lo hadn't gained anything. Qin Hao took one last look and saw that Yuning Chang's body was becoming denser. He didn't know what level she could reach after breaking through this time. He hoped that she could become a ruler. Qin Hao continued forward. When the 7th human ruler's path descended, another woman from the Water Jade Nation and Lei Jiao's junior brother suddenly staggered back a few steps. Their faces turned pale in an instant. At this moment, they didn't force themselves forward. Instead, they sat in meditation like Yuning Chang and began to digest the personal insights they had gained during the confrontation with the human ruler's path. Feng Qinli's 2 junior brothers also stopped here. They had been so close to being able to feel the 7th human ruler's path. What a pity. Currently, many people had been eliminated. 2 martialists from the Ghost region were eliminated for the first time. Changha Lo followed closely behind. Next were the 2 women from the Water Jade Nation, Lei Jiao's junior brother, Feng Qinli's junior brother, and Yuning Chang. Some of the people who had been eliminated had returned to their original positions and gained nothing. Some had also obtained an opportunity to break through. However, those who continued to advance were all evildoers among evildoers. At this moment, everyone had the same thought. The ranking on the royal road might determine their status after entering the sacred palace. Those who reached the end of the royal road had a very high chance of being chosen by the sacred palace master as a personal disciple. Whether it was Lei Jiao, Ning Tianxing, Zhan Yi, or Qingji Han, they all believed that the person must be themselves. As they walked, Qin Hao looked up and saw that Zhan Yi and the others, who were the fastest, had begun to withstand the suppression of the 9th human ruler. The fluctuating telekinetic power in front of them was extremely fierce. The killing power was like a storm. Facing the fierce attack, Zhan Yi and the others' speed was greatly affected. Every step seemed to be a personal limit. It depended on who could hold on in the end. Shou Wuck and Feng Qinli's path of the sword surged with frightening brilliance. They followed closely behind with Zhou Wudao, but their speed was also hindered. Next were Yi Shuihan, Xiaohua, and Chen Wanqin. On the contrary, Yu Qinyang seemed to be struggling. He gradually fell behind and walked with Qin Yun and A Ke. This genius of the southern region did not seem to be as outstanding as expected. The ranking on the royal road was enough to show that there was a big gap between him and Shou Wuck. The 2 of them had once been regarded as equals by the warriors of the southern region. Ignoring the suppression of the 7th emperor's path, whether it was Qin Hao, Xiao Han, or Ke, the strength of the current emperor's path of might did not affect the 3 of them much. Xiao Han was a descendant of the martial emperor, and his mother's clan was even more mysterious. Ke was born with the bloodline of the emperor level, and Ke's mother was a beast emperor. How could mere 7 emperors' paths of might stop the 3 of them? They chased all the way and caught up with Qin Yun and the others. At this time, the 8th beam of light suddenly fell from the sky. It was majestic and mighty, merging with the other 7 emperors' paths of might. It was as if 8 Renhuangs were attacking the group at the same time. At this moment, an extremely ferocious halberd beam came stabbing at Qin Yun. Qin Yun roared and took out the battle halberd from his back. He clenched his fists tightly and thrust it forward, releasing an extremely powerful beam. The beam and the halberd beam clashed, producing a thunderous boom in the void. A terrifying force shattered the beam, and the halberd beam corroded Qin Yun's body. However, Qin Yun threw away the battle halberd and pushed forward with his palms. His soul power surged and condensed into a thick rock wall in an attempt to block the undefeatable halberd beam. However, Qin Yun's strength was still too weak. Or rather, he could not break through his personal limits. After all, the halberd beam that had evolved represented Qin Yun's limit. The halberd beam penetrated the rock wall and shattered it. The powerful beam entered Qin Yun's body, and he staggered as though he had suffered a serious injury. However, the halberd beam did not possess any destructive power. On the contrary, it was like a power that increased one's realm. After it entered Qin Yun's body, he sat on the ground and began to meditate. But with that, Qin Yun's path had come to an end. Cousin, Qin Hao took a step forward and withstood the 8th human emperor suppression. Continue. Don't worry about me. As a member of the Qin family, we cannot lose to them. Qin Yun did not look at Qin Hao. He was digesting the battle halberd's powers that had entered his body. Although his path had come to a halt, Qin Hao still had a chance to continue forward. To surpass them, Aka sat down at the same time. Her pale face appeared somewhat desolate, and her aura was unstable. Clearly, like Qin Yun, she had failed to break through her personal limits and had come to a halt. Let's go. Qin Hao, Xiao Han, and K. Continued forward. At that moment, there was a loud boom. They saw a flaming body fly back from the front. When it flew past them, the heat that emanated from it left Qin Hao stunned. It was none other than Yu Qianyang. After spitting out a mouthful of blood, Yu Qianyang landed beside Chang Hello with a miserable expression. On the other side were 2 ghost, desolate warriors. They had been eliminated. Due to their impatience and refusal to admit defeat, they had been injured by the rebound of their psyche powers. They did not have the chance to attempt the Sovereign Road a second time. Furthermore, they had gained nothing. Qin Yun was different. After failing to challenge his limits, he obediently entered a state of epiphany. Although he could not continue forward, he could use his psyche powers to break through. There was indeed a difference in the human heart. Brother Qianyang, why are you? Chang Hello found it somewhat incredulous. Back then, Yu Qianyang's talent was publicly acknowledged to be the strongest in the southern region. He was comparable to Shouwuk. Now, Shouwuk was undergoing the baptism of the 9th human emperor suppression. Yu Qianyang had been beaten back to his original state. It seemed that the consensus was inaccurate. Although he said that, Chang Helo's eyes flashed a look of schadenfreude. Yu Qianyang was obviously infuriated. He was filled with hatred, just like Chang Helo. Ignoring Shouwuk, even Qin Hao had successfully withstood 8 human emperor suppression. Thankfully, Chang Helo was accompanying him. They had been eliminated together. Furthermore, Chang Helo had not gone as far as him. But at that moment, the rankings on the Sovereign Road changed again. However, an incomparably vast sword light flew out from Head Wuk's body, piercing through the imperial might that was crushing down from above. Instantly, there was no longer any pressure around him, and he directly stepped over the position of the 9th imperial statue. Following that, Feng Qianli, who was walking beside him, felt the sword intent around him shatter. His body went limp as he knelt on one knee. His tightly clenched fist smashed into the ground. Feng Qianli had stopped at the 9 emperor suppression. The successor of the southern region's Wuk sword sect, Shouwuk, had successfully broken through the limits. His sword Dao had reached a new level. Apart from that, Zhang Yi, Lei Jiao, Ning Tianxing, Imo Xian, and Xingji Han had all stepped in the 10th emperor's territory, beginning their final journey. After the 10 emperors was the end. Education 123 Literature Network. Chapter 1390. Chantian Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation surpassing everyone. The suppression of the 10 emperors descended at the same time with terrifying might, forcing Zhang Yi and the others to their limits. At this moment, they were going all out in an attempt to break through the blockade and reach the end of the Emperor Road. Shouwuk followed closely behind. Zhou Wudao was a little slower, but he also succeeded in breaking through the suppression of the 9 emperors. Don't just stand there. We should speed up. A familiar voice came from beside him. Qin Hao looked over and saw that it was Sand. Sand had obviously changed. He was taller and his aura was stronger. His face was brimming with confidence. It was obvious that he had successfully broken through and stepped into the 3rd level of the Emperor realm by borrowing the willpower of the 2 emperors. He must have broken through his personal limit to be able to catch up. Yining Chang, Qin Yun, and Aku all had such opportunities. The prerequisite was that they had to break through to new heights after a successful epiphany like Sand. If they couldn't break through, they couldn't move forward. Qin Hao nodded with a smile. Xiao Han, Ke and Sand walked side by side. Ahead of them was the place where the 9 emperors were suppressed. Shouwuk had succeeded in his challenge of the 9 emperors. Feng Qianli, the successor of the East Continent's peerless Shadow Sword Emperor, was sitting on the ground, forced into a state of epiphany. When Qin Hao and the others were about to enter, Yi Yao of the Night Net Palace shook her head and pursed her lips. My path ends here. Pavilion Master Qin, you can do it. With that, she sat on the ground, and a wisp of Emperor Realm willpower entered her body, causing her to emit a strange dark light. She was about to break through. Qin Hao's heart skipped a beat. This Emperor Road was truly the best place to test geniuses. No matter how popular they were in front of others, once they stepped into it, the so-called geniuses had nowhere to hide. Palace Lord Yi had once told Qin Hao that Yi Yao's talent was actually limited. However, she had put in 3 or even 4 times the effort of an ordinary person to obtain the skills she had today. Because of this persistence and work, Palace Lord Yi had taken Yi Yao as a disciple and given her the surname Yi. Perhaps in terms of talent, there was a gap between Yi Yao and Shouwuk. Even so, Palace Lord Ye's translation, Yi Yao's assessment, was that of Yi Yao's art. That was how Yi Yao's cultivation was, which was why she rarely appeared in front of her peers. It's a pity that his innate foundation is weak. Qin Hao sighed. Cultivation was a cruel competition. Talent could not be changed. To a certain extent, it did affect martial artists. Is Lord's translation. Is translation Sand translation. Luan's, Luo Lord Lun. War is Yi Qing translation in D translation. Yi to emperor to translation. Translation emperor lord emperor emperor to emperor to emperor to the emperor to emperor to heir. That's good. Luo Yuliang nodded gratefully. Qin Hao's words seemed to have lifted his spirits. He looked at the back of Chief Wu Kei, who was still moving forward. Even though he wanted to chase, he was powerless. It seemed that the southern region's evaluation of Shouwuk was well-deserved. Even as the son of Emperor Luo Yuliang was completely convinced today. Brother Qingqi, are you okay? Qin Hao sensed that Zheng Qingqi's condition was also very poor. It's impossible for me to chase after the first flawless, but I know that you definitely can. Zheng Qingqi forced a smile and looked up at the 9th Renwang statue. The moment his gaze fell on it, he immediately felt an incomparably vast majesty, as if it could crush him to the ground. Clenching his teeth, Zheng Qingqi's expression was resolute as he continued to walk. One step, just one more step. Even if he could not catch up to Shouwuk, he had to take this step. This was the only existence that Zheng Qingqi could challenge, and also his limit. Buzz. Everyone stepped into the area of the 9th Renhuang statue. Suddenly, Endless light sprinkled down and merged into the power of the 8 Renhuang. At this moment, different images appeared in everyone's minds. Zheng Qingqi felt as if he was drifting alone in the vast ocean. Raging waves surged up to the 9 levels of heaven, trying to swallow him up. Zheng Qingqi's body shook violently as if he was hit by the waves and could fall to the ground at any time. He closed his eyes tightly and clenched his fists, using his will to resist the erosion of the waves. In his heart, there was an incomparably firm harbor. As the soul ship appeared behind him, the words of his ancestors flashed in his mind. The whirlpool that the world trembles in is the channel that the Zheng clan has conquered. The sea was not scary. It was the home of the Zheng clan. Huh! Zheng Qingqi's mouth trembled, and the soul ship instantly bloomed with brilliant light. In the light, it seemed to have turned into a giant golden ship. No matter how the waves in his mind crashed into the 9 heavens, his will remained unmoved. At this moment, the might of the 9 Renhuang surrounding Zheng Qingqi suddenly collapsed. An array of dazzling golden flame rose into the sky. He had successfully broken his personal limit and become a Renhuang. "Congratulations," said Qin Hao. In this way, Zheng Qingqi had the strength to continue forward. However, Zheng Qingqi shook his head and said, "I've just become a Renhuang and have reached my limit. I'm satisfied. Brother Qin Hao, you guys go ahead." When he finished speaking, Zheng Qingqi sat down cross-legged and began to digest the power of the Renhuang plane that he had obtained. He had no regrets. He had done what he could. Perhaps compared to the several peerless figures of the front, he was indeed inferior. However, many cultivators on the continent stopped at the Renhuang plane. Now, he had used the might of the Renhuang plane to suppress them and become a Renhuang. This trip was not in vain. Excessive pursuit of power was not a good thing. It was more important for cultivators to understand themselves and know when to advance and retreat. Qin Hao revealed a look of approval. Not only was Zheng Qingqi's character trustworthy, but his mind was clear and open-minded. His future achievements would definitely not be limited to the Renhuang plane. "Let's go." Qin Hao continued forward. At this moment, Xiaohan, Sea Sand, and Care had withstood the 9 waves of Renhuang plane's might. They were not far from where Yishuehan, Xiaohua, and Chen Wanqin were. Looking at the departing crowd, Zheng Qingqi's eyes were filled with blessings. However, there was one thing that puzzled him. The geniuses who had challenged the Renhuang Road were all facing the suppression of telekinesis. The various forms of telekinesis martial arts had sealed the path. Only by breaking through their own limits could they continue forward. However, compared to the others, why did Qin Hao not have any elemental attacks? Not only Qin Hao, but even Xiaohan was the same. This was very strange. Zheng Qingqi had noticed that even when K.Er was advancing with her telekinesis, there were countless birds hovering above her head, creating endless obstacles. However, Qin Hao and Xiaohan did not. Stepping into the area of the 9 Supreme's might, Qin Hao soon caught up with Xiaohua and the rest. Xiaohua and the rest were not in good condition. It was extremely strenuous for them to walk. With Qin Hao's arrival, everyone smiled. "Big brother, I can't hold on much longer. If my father knows that I've withstood the might of the 9 emperors, he'll be proud, won't he?" Xiaohua said with a pale face. "Don't give up." Qin Hao encouraged, but he could also see that Xiaohua had reached his limit. According to his condition, it was impossible for him to challenge the 10 emperors' might. He was only holding on now because he wanted to take a few more steps. "Qin Hao, you absolutely cannot lose to Zhang Yi. Not only him, everyone in front of you must surpass you. This is not only Sister Yingxiang's wish, it's also my wish, it's everyone's wish. You can do it." Chen Wanqin suddenly dispersed her soul power. Along with it, an extremely cold air current swept over. With a crack, she turned into an ice sculpture on the way. "Sister Wanqin." Xiaohan was shocked. "Let's go." Qin Hao lowered his head and held Xiaohan's hand tightly. Chen Wanqin was unharmed. She had turned into an ice sculpture and should be undergoing the baptism of ice, like an epiphany. She should not be disturbed. When the ice was broken, her cultivation base would definitely rise to a higher level. It was a pity that she had stopped under the might of the 9 emperors. Roar! On the other side, the green ox phantom that enveloped Sayogwa disintegrated and disappeared. His body was paralyzed, and he squatted on the ground. The violent aura from before had disappeared. His head was lowered, as if he had lost all signs of life. At the same time, Little Nine let out a sharp ghost cry. His entire body exploded, turning into a mass of black gas that floated in the air. But regardless of whether it was Sayogwa or Little Nine, they were illuminated by a wisp of human emperor's light, sacred and dignified. Qin Hao knew that they had stopped under the might of the 9 emperors. They were stopped by the power of telekinesis and fell into a state of epiphany, about to welcome the opportunity to break through. But in this way, they could not withstand the baptism of the 10 emperors. And Sayogwa and Little Nine were only 3 or 4 steps away from the 10 emperors. It was really a pity. Yi Shuihan looked back and saw Yuning Chong, Qin Yun, and Aku sitting cross-legged. Qin Wanqin had turned into an ice sculpture along the way. Little Nine's soul was a nightmare, forming a mass of black gas. Sayogwa was like a powerless baby, dying on the spot. Until now, only Yi Shuihan was left to accompany Qin Hao. He clenched his fists, and a firmer belief was born in his heart. The surging water force became even more turbulent. I want to reach the 10 emperors' territory. I must reach it. In front, Zhang Yi and the others continued to move forward while bearing the might of the 10 emperors. Although it was difficult for them to move forward, with veins bulging on their faces like a snail carrying a heavy mountain, they still moved forward bit by bit. It was the same for Shou Wuk and Zhou Wudao. Now, beside Qin Hao, there was Xiao Han, Kai Yi Shuihan, and Hai Sha. They were only a few steps away from the 10 emperors' territory, and the pressure above their heads was getting heavier and harder to bear. Kai looked like she was in pain. She covered her ears with both hands, and there was a flock of strange-looking birds flying around above her head, letting out sharp cries. No one else could hear this sound, but it directly affected Kai's mind, as if her brain was being torn apart. Kai, 2 more steps. Hold on. Ever since they stepped onto the Emperor's Road, the suppression of psychic power became stronger and stronger. Xiao Han's spiritual sense seemed to become stronger under the pressure, and she could even speak coherently. Seeing Kai in pain, Xiao Han's heart ached. But she also knew that she could not share the pressure with Kai. After all, the ugly birds were an obstacle in Kai's heart, and she had to break through it herself. Sister, it's so scary. I can't take it. Kai's face was distorted, and blood came out from the corner of her mouth. She shook her head desperately. 2 more steps, and they would reach the 10 emperors' territory. Now, she did not want to take another step, as if she would fall into the Avicii hell if she took another step. Chapter 1391. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The final journey her mind was in chaos as tearing sounds echoed. Countless demonic birds and ancient beasts ran amok. They were primitive and huge. It was as if time had flowed backward and she had fallen into the beginning of time. Ancestral demonic birds soared in the air, their wingspans spanning hundreds of miles. They covered the sky and covered the sun. There were even images of them tearing apart giant dragons. It was terrifying. Kai pursed her red lips tightly. Her expression was one of pain and struggle. Her spirit transformed into the shadow of a skylark and swam through the air, passing through the ancient demonic birds. She dodged and escaped. She was as insignificant as an ant. Perhaps she would be buried in the stomach of a demonic bird in the next moment. The strong preyed on the weak, and class oppression was innate. She was unable to resist it all. Little girl, although I don't know what you're seeing or experiencing, I know that it must be extremely painful. However, as a demonic beast, I have to tell you that the golden apes and skylarks have been able to reproduce until now. They have been worn down by time and stood out among the other beasts. This is enough to prove the strength of our race. No matter what you face, everything you see is just a bubble. They are losers of natural selection. They are trash that died in history. What is there to fear? Stay true to your heart, and you can defeat your inner demons. C-San's voice rumbled. His eyes were bloodshot and his aura was violent. It was as if he was fighting some monster. In his mind, there were countless titans blocking him. He had to defeat the titans before he could enter the territory of the 10 emperors. Even so, he still guided K. Demonic beasts were different from humans. Qin Hao could not guess K.'s state of mind as a demonic beast. After all, he was a human and different from others. Even if the 9 emperors' suppression was strong enough to stop Feng Qianli here, to Qin Hao, the suppression was almost non-existent. As an emperor, the emperor of men, how could he be stopped by the emperors? However, he could not help K.'. However, C-San's words seemed to have an effect. The struggle in K.'s expression gradually turned into determination. Bit by bit, she loosened her hands from her ears, and a shocking aura spread out. Then, a huge shadow of a peacock descended from the sky. Its majestic and sacred aura dispersed the strange birds in the sky. Its noble eyes looked down on the world. Light scattered and C-San shone on K.'s body. At that moment, K.'r broke through 2 levels in a row. 1 step, 2 steps. After 2 steps, she entered the 3rd level of the Emperor realm and stepped into the territory of the 10 emperors. At the same time, C-San let out a heaven-shaking roar as he stretched out his terrifying fist and unleashed a resplendent fist light. The fist light pierced forward as if it had swept away all obstacles and destroyed all of the titans. After this punch, C-San's mountain ape body glowed with a golden luster, showing signs of atavism. His cultivation broke through another realm, rising to the 4th layer of heaven and entering the territory of the 10 emperors. The water force raged around Yi Shuihan. Wisps of Renhuang's psyche power turned into light and shrouded him. In the light, he seemed to be wearing a set of silver armor. His cold eyes were motionless. It was as if he had climbed to the peak of life and become the emperor of martial arts. 2nd level Emperor Realm. Qin Hao was pleasantly surprised. Yi Shuihan had actually advanced 3 levels from the 8th level Yuan Venerate. He was indeed worthy of being the son of the dragon Abyss Emperor Lord. This ability was indeed the most talented among all of them. Even Xiaoguo was slightly inferior in comparison. I'm afraid that everyone will become emperors today. Qin Hao shook his head. Perhaps the opportunity to become emperors was only the lowest level. The funny thing was that compared to everyone else, he hadn't even obtained the lowest opportunity and was still a Yuan Venerate. The Renhuang psyche power was too weak and couldn't stimulate Qin Hao to his limits. Hopefully, there would be a truly terrifying existence at the end of this path. Otherwise, Qin Hao was afraid that he would have to return empty-handed. Everyone looked at each other and smiled. Yi Shuihan had become emperors, while K.'r and C-San had advanced. However, they didn't congratulate or feel complacent. After all, they had just stepped into the territory of the 10 emperors, and there were many figures ahead that they needed to chase. Compared to the people ahead, what was there to be proud of? As they stepped into the territory of the 10 emperors, the last wisp of the Renhuang psyche power enveloped them and converged into the 9 emperors' psyche power above. Instantly, the pressure and fear around them increased dramatically. Everyone couldn't describe it. They only felt as if their entire body had been imprisoned in place and they couldn't move. If they wanted to take another step forward, they would have to give it their all. The sudden increase in pressure was like pushing him to the limits of his personal limits. At this moment, they finally understood why it was so difficult for Zhang Yi and the others ahead. However, Qin Hao still didn't seem to feel anything. Xiaohan was the same. Big brother Zheng Qinqi was right. Given his 1st level Emperor Realm condition, he definitely won't be able to complete the suppression of the 9 emperors. Brother-in-law, big sister, K.'r has really tried her best. Although I really want to accompany you for a while longer, I need to stop and cultivate. Taking 3 steps while withstanding the suppression of the 10 emperors drained K.R. of all her strength. Like the others, she sat down cross-legged and entered a state of epiphany. She needed to digest this energy after raising her realm by 2 levels. Qin Hao nodded and looked at Yishuehan and C-Sand. He asked, "Can you still walk? I might not be able to reach the end, but every step counts." C-Sand's back was hunched as sweat poured down his cheeks. His golden ape body was about to collapse from the pressure. In fact, stepping into the territory of the 10 emperors was something to be proud of. After all, few people in the entire continent could do it. "I'll give it my all. No matter what, I want to see the scenery at the end." Yishuehan was a little delirious at that moment. He felt his head swell, as though a huge winter melon had been stuffed into it. However, he had witnessed Sayogwa, Little Nine, and Xinyan stop at the Sovereign Road. He remembered his goal very clearly. All right, Qin Hao felt that Yishuehan was a little crazy. If this continued, he might turn into a retard. He had to act according to the situation. Once he discovered something amiss, he had to immediately knock him unconscious. Cutting him off by a few steps was better than letting Yishuehan suffer a chi deviation. Xiaohan stopped and hugged K.R. before proceeding forward with the group. On the way, they first encountered the Water Jade, Holy Empire's fairy Qianning. She had extraordinary talent and had followed the first echelon into the territory of the 10 emperors. She was in the lead for a while, but unfortunately, she was stuck midway and lost touch with the people ahead of her. When Qin Hao and company walked over, Fairy Qianning, who was drenched in sweat, was a little surprised to see her graceful figure. "All of you actually managed to follow me." She looked at the group, and when her gaze landed on Yishuehan, the look in her eyes turned odd. Qin Hao and C-San were very strong. Fairy Qianning knew this. For the 2 of them to reach the territory of the 10 emperors would only surprise others, but not her. She did not understand Xiaohan's words very well. However, Yishuan's eyes were bloodshot, and he was mumbling something. It was obvious that he was delirious. However, his body was glowing with water, and he was very crazy. To be able to walk over like this, he was really, especially when he walked to Fairy Qianning's side. Yishuehan seemed to notice her gaze and laughed strangely at her. His expression was quite scary. "I'm just passing by." Qin Hao did not have the time to chat with Fairy Qianning. He walked over with the group. In the next moment, they met 2 people, Lei Jiao and Mo Xian. Lei Jiao was foaming at the mouth. He crawled on the ground with his buttocks sticking out. Finally, he could not take it anymore and fainted on the road. However, his body was shrouded in light, and an extremely strong power circulated. He was much stronger than when he was fighting with Qin Hao at the West Mountain. There was no doubt that he had broken through to the next realm. Mo Xian sat on the ground. 2 souls appeared behind him. The Guqin spirit was fragmented, and the other soul light vaguely looked like an ancient demonic beast. Bai Zhe. "No wonder," Qin Hao muttered. Back in the June Lookout Pavilion in Feng City, Mo Xian had considered everything beneath his notice. Even when he was defeated by Qin Hao, he still refused to admit defeat because he had used 1 strand of soul energy, and the other strand of soul energy was actually Bai Zhe. Bai Zhe was known to be as famous as the Tao Tai. This could explain why he and Zhou Wudao could not defeat each other. Both of them had 2 souls, and the second soul was equally strong. Unfortunately, it seemed that on this Emperor Road, Mo Xian was a little weaker. After all, he stopped moving forward, but Zhou Wudao was still walking. He did not talk to the 2. Lei Jiao fainted, and Mo Xian entered an epiphany. Qin Hao did not have a good relationship with them. Moreover, even if the 2 of them were awake, they would probably not talk to Qin Hao. At most, they would look at him with envy and jealousy. They continued to move forward. Along the way, Haisha could not hold on anymore and entered a second epiphany. It was unknown whether his strength would improve after the second epiphany. Qin Hao and Xiao Han finally caught up with the group in front of them. The last part of the telekinesis journey of the 10 sovereigns was very long, about 500 feet away. Moreover, the pressure was extremely strong. Every step consumed almost all of the cultivator's strength. Therefore, the previously powerful group was not very fast. As Qin Hao and Xiao Han arrived, the people subconsciously stopped for a few seconds and looked back. Humph! Zhang Yi snorted. He knew that Qin Hao was definitely not that weak. First, he fell behind and then caught up. Was he trying to show off? Ning Tianqing narrowed his eyes and did not say anything. He simply nodded at Qin Hao. He was actually a little surprised. After all, he knew how strong the suppression of the 10 emperors was. At the Golden Light City arena debate, although Qin Hao showed extraordinary strength, in Ning Tianqing's view, there was still a gap between him and Shouwuk. If they fought, Qin Hao might not be a match for Shouwuk. Of course, he would not be a match for Ning Tianqing. In fact, he thought that the title of the Southern Territories Conqueror was not true for Qin Hao. Ning Tianqing did not care about this. He was indifferent to the rankings. But today, the ranking of the Royal Road was very important to him. Rather than saying that it was an opportunity, it was better to say that it was a test left by the cultivators of the Divine Palace. More importantly, Qingji Han was present. He did not know how many people would reach the end, but the first to do so would be Ning Tianqing. Brother Qin Hao missed Xiao Han. Shouwuk nodded and smiled. Swordwell was still soaring around him. It could be seen that he was still full of strength to move forward. Wuk, your sword seems to have reached a mysterious realm, Qin Hao said with admiration. Looking at the floating sword light, he could guess Shouwuk's progress. Well, maybe when I reach the end of the Royal Road, I can prove that my uncle's sword is strong and that my way of the sword is stronger, Shouwuk replied very seriously. He had been trained by the Sword Emperor of the Southern Territory all his life and had also competed with him. His way of the sword could not be limited to the domain of the Sword Emperor. It had to surpass him. You will surpass him. Qin Hao's eyes and tone were very certain. After all, when he was free, he went to the sword sect to visit Elder Meng and had a private duel with Shouwuk. There was no victory or defeat. To be precise, the two of them were just exchanging pointers. No one was serious about the so-called victory or defeat. Even so, Shouwuk was indeed very strong. He was not just strong. Qin Hao had experienced it before. This person was born with the rules of the way of the sword. The power of the rules was a skill comprehended by emperor-level cultivators. Once the rules were out, life and death were decided. Shouwuk's power of the rules was called penetration. It could almost ignore defenses 3 times stronger than his own. He had such talent. If he was serious, no one in the way of the sword could withstand the power of his sword. Among the younger generation of the Southern Territory, the others were at one level. Shouwuk himself was at another level. He lived up to his reputation. It's a pity. No matter what, I can't beat you. Hearing Qin Hao's pertinent evaluation, Shouwuk was very happy. However, he knew that he could not beat the man in front of him. To be more precise, he only had a 1/10 chance of killing Qin Hao. However, at the moment of the sword, Qin Hao had a 50% chance of killing Shouwuk. This was because Qin Hao's defense was too abnormal. Unless he was not on guard, he could not beat Qin Hao in a head-on battle. Of course, it would not be easy for Qin Hao to kill him. Stop flattering each other. Don't you see? Mo Xian can't take it anymore. He has been defeated by me. Ha ha ha. Zhou Wudao held his stomach and laughed wildly. He laughed so hard that tears almost flowed out. For many years, he had never won against Mo Xian in a real sense. Today, he won. Zhou Wudao went further. There was nothing happier than this. Education 123 Literature Network. To others, no one would be able to resist her temptation. However, what kind of temper did Qin Hao have? His arrogance was unparalleled. If he agreed to follow a woman, the sun would rise from the west. Shouwuk also thought so. Qin Hao is a genius. If he really nodded, it would really be a mistake. Brother, perhaps I should remind you that this is the princess of the Daqin Empire of the East Continent. The East Continent is vast and far beyond the southern region. It is the holy land that Western Liang envies. Following the princess is a great opportunity for you, Ning Tianxing said, although accompanying Qing Jihan would make others jealous. However, the princess of the East Continent's meaning was clear. She simply admired Qin Hao's talent. That was all. Ning Tianxing did not think that Qing Jihan would admire someone because of his talent. Moreover, was Qin Hao worthy of the first princess of the East Continent? No, Qin Hao said calmly. If it weren't for the incident 600 years ago, Qing Jihan would probably be kneeling on the ground and greeting him every day. Or she might become his daughter. Even though he had cut off all ties with her, it was ridiculous for this junior to want Qin Hao to follow her. You're rejecting me? Qing Jihan was stunned. She was surprised. Think carefully before you answer, because I want to tell you that this is the first time I've invited someone since I was born. What she said was true. It was an honor to be under the command of the first princess of the East Continent. Many geniuses in the East Continent dreamed of it. If Qing Jihan said this to someone else, that person would be willing to die for her. Not interested. Qin Hao did not want to waste time and continued walking. He calmed down and talked to Qing Jihan, but it did not mean that he had completely forgotten his hatred. But the incident 600 years ago was caused by Han Lingxian and Zhang Wu. It had nothing to do with Qing Jihan. She was just a junior. You really won't consider it. Qing Jihan looked a little cold. Although she was not the biological daughter of Empress Lingxian, she grew up in a phoenix's nest. If she asked, there was nothing in the world that she couldn't get. Everyone had to follow her lead. Now she invited Qin Hao, but he coldly refused. It was the first time that she had taken the initiative. True opportunities don't require charity from others. If one's ability is great enough, even the heavens will make way for you. In the end, Qin Hao stared at Han Qingji as if he was asking her, do I need you to give me opportunities? You don't know how to appreciate kindness. Qing Jihan snorted. She admired Qin Hao and cherished his talent. She could give him a broader world and let him show his talent, but he didn't appreciate it. Ning Tianxing's face was also very ugly. Was Qin Hao going to go against him? At this time, Xiao Han walked up to Qing Jihan. Her handsome features had a faint sense of holiness. Compared to the first princess of the East Continent, her flawless face was not inferior. She questioned, don't know how to appreciate kindness? Are you qualified to say that to him? Who are you? Qing Jihan looked at Xiao Han with a condescending attitude. She narrowed her eyes and looked at the woman in front of her. Even the first princess of the East Continent had to admit that she was really beautiful. For several months, she had secretly spied on Qin Hao and found that he took good care of this woman. They were probably lovers. Xiao Han seemed to be lacking in intelligence and looked stupid all day long. This had nothing to do with her. What made her unhappy was that Xiao Han dared to talk to her like that. Who did he think he was? Oh, let me remind you. This is the first princess of the northern borderline, the pearl of Emperor Xiao, Princess Jingwei. Zhou Wudao had a mischievous smile. Ning Tianxing had called Qing Jihan that just now, and he simply said that. The northern borderline? Qing Jihan pictured the broken land swept by the cold wind in her mind and sneered. How can it be compared to the East Continent? Sorry to interrupt, but the East Continent has not only the Daqin, but also the great Zhou Empire. Zhou Wudao continued to speak, implying that he was not from her family. Shut up. Qing Jihan turned her head and scolded angrily. How can it be compared? You can compete with him after you have surpassed me. Xiao Han walked straight and came to Qin Hao's side. The two of them walked towards the end. You can compete with me after you have surpassed the pearl of Emperor Xiao. Ha ha. Zhou Wudao laughed and walked away. It was rare to see a scene that embarrassed Qing Jihan, but he seemed to be thinking too much. The him that Xiao Han mentioned was obviously Qin Hao. You could talk about competing with Qin Hao after you have won the sword in my hand. Shou Wuk said coldly and chased after him. Squeak. Qing Jihan clenched her fists. Don't let them disturb you. I know Qin Hao very well. Although he has some talent, he thinks highly of himself and has always been arrogant. He is not worth your anger, and I believe that he is not worth mentioning in front of you. Ning Tianxing looked at Qing Jihan gently. In fact, she wanted to say that she was willing to compete with Qin Hao for her. Angry for him? You think too much. Qingji Han closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She instantly regained her demeanor as the first princess of the East Continent. Yes, she was not angry for him, but that guy was really annoying. Although the opportunity to become an emperor is right in front of you, it still depends on your ability this time, especially if your talent is outstanding enough. Often, great fortunes are left behind in the mortal world and possess spirituality. It's not so easy to choose an inheritor. Even if some people rely on external help to reach this point and barely keep up with the other geniuses, it's absolutely impossible to deceive the emperor's eye. Don't you think so, wise brother? Ning Tianxing looked at Qin Hao, his long and narrow eyes hiding deep meaning. He saw that everyone on the path of the Emperor realm had faced tribulation after tribulation. Only by breaking through the endless limits could they continue forward. However, Qin Hao had walked easily and calmly. Including Xiao Han, he hadn't been obstructed at all. What did this mean? Qin Hao and Xiao Han had clearly used external help to block the suppression of the 10 emperors. All of this had been helped by Yi Ninghong of the Nightnet Palace. Of course, all of the geniuses present had been bestowed with powerful treasures by their elders before joining the trials. However, they wouldn't easily reveal them unless their lives were in danger. After all, although the obstacles on the path of the 10 emperors were strong, it was still a test. Everyone would gain something if they passed it. However, Qin Hao's body hadn't changed at all. So what if he used external help to block the suppression? It was just that he gained nothing. After all, he was the one who had cheated himself. The others naturally understood the meaning behind Ning Tianxing's words. After all, he wasn't the only one who had noticed Qin Hao's abnormality. At this moment, everyone's eyes were on Qin Hao. Shouwuk frowned slightly. In fact, he didn't want to believe that Qin Hao had used external help. With Qin Hao's talent, he didn't need it. Brother Tianxing is right. I will rely on my own ability to pass the Emperor's test. I won't use external help. Qin Hao smiled modestly, secretly holding Xiao Han's hand tightly. A trace of anger appeared on Xiao Han's calm face. She knew very well that whether it was her or Qin Hao, they hadn't relied on any external help to reach this point on the Emperor realm. Ning Tianxing was slandering Qin Hao. I hope so. I'm just advising you out of kindness. When you face the Emperor's test later, if you really can't withstand it, you don't have to force yourself. Ning Tianxing spoke in a teaching tone. After he finished speaking, he didn't look at Qin Hao anymore. He turned to Qingji Han and said gently, Princess, you and I both have a great chance of obtaining the Emperor's inheritance. We must do our best. Although Zhang Yi had yet to become a great emperor and did not possess emperor's will, he was still able to unleash terrifying destructive power with his saber Dao. At this moment, the sky and earth were filled with endless saber lights. Even the falling star was overshadowed by the saber lights. What a crazy person, Shouwuk said. Facing the 9 heavens' consecutive slashes, even he felt a great sense of crisis. His blade can definitely tear my Taotai's soul apart. Zhou Wudao had seen countless saber cultivators before. However, this was the first time he had seen someone as crazy as Zhang Yi. It was as if in his eyes, there was nothing in the world that he could not chop apart. There was no obstacle that he could not break. Walalala! Finally, the saber lights disappeared. Everything returned to normal. After 9 strikes, Zhang Yi panted heavily. The hand holding the saber trembled as if it had been drained of all its strength. However, there were still many saber lights in the air. It could be seen how ferocious his attacks were. Did he block it? Ning Tianxing asked seriously. He had underestimated Zhang Yi. He had actually been able to withstand the attacks of the Emperor's statue. Bang! Unexpectedly, a beam of light appeared in the calm void. The star that had disappeared condensed again. Between heaven and earth, a terrifying emperor's will descended. It was as if the emperor's statue had been angered. After a loud bang, the star crashed into the exhausted Zhang Yi. The latter was like a kite with a broken string. He spat out a fountain of blood and fell back to his original position. Zhang Yi had failed the challenge. 3 steps. Zhou Wudao was extremely shocked. It had only been 3 steps. Even someone as strong as Zhang Yi had been beaten back to his original position. Even if Zhang Yi had used such a violent saber technique, he could not break through the emperor statue's attack. At this moment, everyone was shocked. Creak! Zhang Yi clenched his fists and then slowly relaxed them. He had a self-mocking expression. On the imperial road, the majesty of the 10 emperors had gathered one after another. He had never taken them seriously. Facing the imperial tribulation, he had still shattered them with a single slash. However, he could not break through the emperor's will and obtain the emperor statue's approval. Where was he lacking? Your saber Dao is pure and already has the embryonic form of the emperor's will. The 9 slashes technique can be said to be perfect. However, in the end, your state of mind is flawed. You do not understand your own weakness. Qin Hao stepped forward and extended a hand to Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi's 9 slashes was actually very good, but the problem did not lie in his saber. My own weakness? Zhang Yi did not understand, but he still clasped his hands and stood up. Isn't it better for cultivators to be stronger? Why does it have to do with weakness? Shouwuk was also very confused about this question.